Today, we're looking at some of the most dumb animal attacks ever recorded. From a Florida man who brought an 8-foot alligator into his living room to impress his friends, to a seasoned hiker who walked toward a mountain lion and stared it down.
It was October 7th, 2017, at a private roadside menagerie near Wynwood, Oklahoma, where a collection of aging enclosures housed exotic animals along a dusty stretch of rural highway. The facility advertised itself as a hands-on wildlife experience, drawing families looking for cheap entertainment during road trips. Wesley Hartman, a 36-year-old insurance adjuster from Tulsa, had stopped with his wife Dana and their 8-year-old son Thomas on their way back from visiting relatives in Texas. The afternoon was warm and bright, with a light crowd scattered among the animal pens. Dana, a 34-year-old retail manager, had read the posted rules aloud as they entered, noting the prominent "Do Not Feed" or touch signs. Thomas, an energetic child, had been darting from exhibit to exhibit, pressing his face against bars. The chimpanzee enclosure sat near the center of the property, a concrete pad surrounded by heavy steel bars with an outer safety rail positioned roughly 1 meter back from the primary barrier. The gap between the rail and the bars was narrow, filled with dirt and debris, and clearly marked as off-limits. A keeper named Rick, a 45-year-old attendant who appeared overworked, had reminded visitors twice to stay behind the outer rail. Inside the enclosure, several adult chimpanzees moved restlessly, their vocalizations growing louder as the crowd pressed closer. Rick mentioned that tensions had been high among the males recently. Thomas had been leaning over the outer rail when his sunglasses slipped from his head and fell into the restricted gap, landing on the concrete lip just beneath the bars. Wesley decided to retrieve them quickly. Chimpanzees are among the strongest primates relative to their size, with adult males possessing upper body strength estimated to be 4 to 6 times greater than that of an average human. They have powerful jaws capable of delivering crushing bites, and their canine teeth can grow up to 2 inches long. Chimpanzees are highly intelligent but also unpredictable and can become aggressive without warning, especially in captivity where stress amplifies territorial behaviors. Their grip strength is immense, and once they latch onto a limb, dislodging them is nearly impossible. Chimpanzees have been documented engaging in coordinated attacks, with multiple individuals working together to overpower threats. Wesley stepped over the outer safety rail and leaned into the gap, extending his right arm toward the sunglasses. His fingers brushed the frame just as a large male chimpanzee lunged forward and seized his wrist through the bars. A second chimp grabbed his sleeve near the elbow. The grip was immediate and unbreakable. Wesley tried to pull back, but the chimps yanked his arm hard against the steel bars. His shoulder slammed into the metal, and he lost his footing. Additional chimps joined, their hands and teeth targeting the exposed forearm. The first bite came to the back of his hand, teeth sinking through skin and crushing small bones. A second chimp bit into his forearm, tearing away muscle. Blood began streaming down his arm. Wesley shouted and tried to brace his feet, but the animals pulled with coordinated force, wrenching his arm repeatedly against the bars. His fingers were bitten next, with one chimp clamping down and pulling until skin tore and tendons snapped. Another bite targeted his upper arm, the teeth penetrating deep into tissue. The chimps began a tug of war, each pulling in different directions, causing massive soft tissue damage. Dana screamed for help while shielding Thomas. Rick sprinted over with a hose and sprayed the chimps, but they barely reacted. He grabbed a metal panel and banged it loudly against the enclosure. The noise caused a brief hesitation, but the chimps quickly resumed. Wesley's arm was now covered in blood, with multiple deep lacerations visible. Another keeper arrived with a fire extinguisher and discharged it directly at the chimps. The sudden blast finally forced them to retreat. Bystanders rushed forward and pulled Wesley away from the bars. He collapsed onto the ground, his arm mangled and bleeding profusely. The brachial artery in his upper arm had been severed, and blood poured from the wound in rhythmic spurts. Dana and another visitor applied pressure, but the bleeding was uncontrollable. Wesley's face turned ashen, his breathing rapid and shallow. He lost consciousness within 2 minutes. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, but despite immediate attempts to stabilize him, Wesley went into cardiac arrest during transport and was pronounced dead en route to the hospital. An investigation by the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation determined that the facility had multiple safety violations, including inadequate barrier distances. The enclosure was ordered closed pending upgrades. Wesley's wife Dana released a statement describing her husband as a devoted father who had made a split-second decision to help his son. She called for stricter regulations on roadside zoos. The incident drew national media attention and sparked renewed debate about private menageries. It was March 14th, 2015, and the humid air along the Adelaide River hung thick with the promise of another scorching Australian afternoon, where the muddy waters concealed predators that had remained unchanged since the age of dinosaurs. Elliot Brame was a 42-year-old diesel mechanic from Katherine, known throughout the Northern Territory for his ability to resurrect dead engines and his equally legendary capacity for beer. His reputation for working miracles on broken-down road trains had earned him steady work across the remote mining camps. Elliot had driven down to Darwin for the weekend with 3 friends, celebrating the completion of a contract. The group had chosen a familiar fishing spot along the Adelaide River, a stretch of muddy bank where Elliot had been coming for over a decade. He prided himself on knowing these waters better than most tourists. His friends respected his local knowledge, though they'd grown accustomed to his habit of dismissing safety warnings. The area was a public fishing zone with no barriers separating visitors from the river, making alcohol consumption near the bank especially hazardous. The Adelaide River system harbors some of Australia's largest saltwater crocodiles, apex predators that can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 2,000 pounds. These ancient reptiles possess the strongest bite force of any living animal, over 3,700 pounds per square inch, and can remain motionless for hours before exploding into action at speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour in short bursts. By mid-afternoon, the group had consumed most of their beer supply. The group had noticed several crocodiles basking on the opposite bank earlier. The bright yellow warning signs posted every 50 yards along the riverbank clearly stated to not swim due to crocodiles lurking, but Elliot had always viewed them as suggestions rather than absolute prohibitions. When his friend mentioned seeing a large crocodile slide into the water near their fishing spot an hour earlier, Elliot had laughed it off, claiming the animals were more afraid of them. The accident began when Elliot, reaching for another beer, accidentally knocked over the cooler with his elbow. The plastic container tumbled down the muddy bank and splashed into the river, immediately beginning to drift toward the center of the channel. Inside were at least a dozen unopened bottles, representing the remainder of their afternoon's entertainment. Without hesitation, Elliot stood up, his movements slightly unsteady from the alcohol, and announced his intention to retrieve it. His friends called out warnings, but Elliot was already pulling off his boots and wading into the murky water fully clothed. The water was deeper than they'd anticipated, reaching his chest within a few steps. The cooler bobbed just beyond his reach, forcing him to wade deeper. Elliot's alcohol-impaired judgment led him to underestimate both the river's depth and the distance to his targe, forcing him to begin treading water in the crocodile-infested river. The shifting mud and slight current made his footing likely unreliable, increasing the risk of being pulled under. The attack came without warning. A massive saltwater crocodile, estimated over 15 feet, likely the same one his friends had spotted earlier, struck with devastating precision. Its jaws clamped around Elliot's left leg just above the knee with bone-crushing force, the serrated teeth penetrating deep into muscle and causing catastrophic leg trauma, resulting in massive arterial bleeding. Elliot's scream of shock and agony echoed across the water as the crocodile began its death roll, a violent spinning motion designed to disorient prey and tear away chunks of flesh. The muddy water around Elliot was stirred and streaked with blood near the surface as arterial blood pumped from the massive wound. Each rotation of the death roll drove the crocodile's teeth deeper, crushing bone and shredding tissue. Elliot's desperate attempts to fight back were futile against the reptile's immense strength and prehistoric killing efficiency. His friends on shore watched in horror, shouting frantically, but unable to enter the water without becoming victims themselves. Within minutes, catastrophic arterial bleeding from the mangled leg had weakened Elliot beyond any chance of escape. The crocodile, maintaining its grip, dragged him briefly toward deeper water near the attack site in a final, violent thrash. Bubbles and blood marked the spot where he disappeared, the muddy water quickly obscuring any trace of the struggle. One of his friends immediately called emergency services on his satellite phone. The rescue helicopter arrived 23 minutes later, but by then the river had returned to its deceptive calm. Recovery operations located remains several hours later, still bearing the massive puncture wounds from the crocodile's teeth. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to crocodile-inflicted trauma, with drowning as a contributing factor. They never found the crocodile responsible. The incident received minimal coverage in local media, treated as another preventable tragedy involving alcohol and ignored safety warnings. Additional warning signs were installed along the riverbank, and Elliot's family held a private funeral in Katherine, where he was remembered as a skilled mechanic. It was May 14, 2016, in the South Luangwa Valley, Zambia. The walking safari had progressed into tall grass along a game path where visibility narrowed, and the group continued forward without repositioning upwind. The air carried damp grass and animal scent, typical at dawn, but stronger at ground level, and the stretch ahead showed little small animal movement, a condition guides associate with predator presence. Arik Madsen was 41, a logistics supervisor from Odense whose work involved route planning, inventory timing, and risk mitigation. Colleagues described him as quiet and methodical. Recently divorced and living alone, this safari was his first trip outside Europe. He booked through a licensed operator and chose a walking safari after reviewing incident summaries indicating lower risk compared to vehicle-related encounters. He selected a premium walking safari for its controlled spacing, firearm support, and limited group size. He attended the safety briefing, asked about wind direction and visibility, and did not consume alcohol prior to departure. The valley that morning was pale with dry grass and low river haze. South Luangwa supports a dense lion population, including established male coalitions that patrol territory at dawn. Adult male lions can accelerate to over 30 miles per hour in short bursts and cover distances under 60 feet in less than 2 seconds. Attacks at close range typically involve direct contact without vocalization or display. The guide carried a large caliber rifle and wore a chest-mounted body camera for safety review. Warning signs were present. A downslope breeze pushing scent forward, brief impala alarm snorts that stopped abruptly, and fresh, overlapping lion tracks crossing the path. The guide paused, checked the wind once, then continued instead of retreating. Without visible warning, the grass ahead parted. 3 adult male lions burst from under 50 feet at full sprint, blurring the first frames of the body camera. There was no charge display or vocalization. The first lion struck Arik head-on, colliding with his upper torso and face and driving him backward. Its jaws closed laterally across the face, fracturing the maxilla and mandible through momentum rather than a downward clamp, followed by a single shake that tore soft tissue as the camera jolted. A second lion struck from behind almost immediately, its jaws locking across the pelvis and upper thigh and transecting major vessels on contact. Blood pulsed across the grass as the animal pulled back. A third lion moved laterally near the lens, snapping and blocking the guide's approach. The guide fired once. Recoil and muzzle dip show the round striking dirt short of the animals. Arik made a single involuntary sound and then went silent. The 2 lions leaned away from each other, using opposing body weight rather than shaking. The pelvis rotated outward as tissue failed, exposing bone near the hip. Blood spread across the frame while the first lion maintained its grip on the head, compressing the airway. Loss of consciousness followed rapidly, consistent with visible blood loss and airway compromise on the footage. A second rifle report, and the sound of paws dragging the body several feet into cover. The image blurred as the guide stepped backward. 1 lion advanced briefly toward the camera before turning away. From first contact to complete loss of movement, approximately 45 seconds elapsed. The guide withdrew and radioed base immediately, leading the remaining guests back along the path without running. An anti-poaching unit arrived 22 minutes later. By then, there were no signs of life. The lions had disengaged after initial feeding, leaving extensive trauma and partial dismemberment consistent with a rapid predatory sequence rather than a defensive mauling. The coroner later determined the cause of death as exsanguination combined with severe craniofacial trauma, including multiple jaw fractures and complete transection of the femoral artery. Death occurred quickly from blood loss and airway compromise, with no evidence of prolonged survival. The footage was reviewed internally for safety assessment, and a short segment later circulated without identifiers. The safari operator revised wind assessment protocols and increased buffer distances near tall grass corridors. No legal action followed, and only a brief local report noted the fatality without naming the victim. The body camera preserved the entire sequence, leaving no uncertainty about how quickly the margin of safety disappeared. It was August 3, 2017. The Adelaide River sat low and opaque under the Northern Territory sun, heat flattening the air and muting sound. Tidal flow had slowed to a crawl, leaving mudbanks exposed and slick. The water appeared still and reflective, conditions that sharply reduced visibility and favored sudden movement from below the surface. with little opportunity for reaction or retreat. Arlo Thorne, 34, had traveled from Minneapolis on his first solo international trip. He worked in insurance claims, known by coworkers as methodical and reserved. The 3-week vacation had been funded by a recent settlement payout, and much of his itinerary centered on documenting the trip through staged outdoor photography. His rental vehicle contained a DSLR camera, multiple lenses, a lightweight tripod, and a wireless remote shutter system he used to film himself composing shots. Saltwater crocodiles along the Adelaide River frequently exceed 13 feet in length, with dominant males occupying preferred basking and ambush sites along accessible mudbanks. Adult males can generate bite forces exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch, capable of crushing bone and collapsing large prey structures instantly. Their typical hunting sequence is brief and mechanical: a rapid linear strike, immediate jaw closure, and retreat to deeper water. Extended surface thrashing is uncommon unless the prey resists strongly or becomes obstructed in shallow terrain. At approximately 10:40 a.m., visitors on a raised public viewing platform observed a large crocodile resting on a sunlit mudbank roughly 40 yards across a narrow channel. The bank sloped gently into the water, its surface damp but firm enough to support several hundred pounds without collapse. The crocodile lay parallel to the waterline, limbs tucked beneath its torso, head angled slightly toward the river. This orientation allowed instant re-entry with minimal body rotation if disturbed. Warning signage along the boardwalk marked a boundary beyond which foot traffic was prohibited. Witnesses later told investigators that Arlo stepped past those markers carrying a tripod and a small camera bag. He positioned the tripod several yards behind him, facing the mudbank, and activated continuous recording. After checking framing on the remote display, he left the tripod in place and advanced alone. The terrain between him and the crocodile consisted of compacted clay overlaid with a thin film of drying silt. The ground appeared stable but held shallow depressions where previous water levels had receded. To lower his profile for the shot, Arlo lay prone and began crawling forward, dragging the camera bag beside him. The movement reduced his vertical silhouette, but increased surface vibration along the ground. The crocodile did not visibly react. Its eyes remained partially hooded, a common basking posture that still allows forward visual awareness. More importantly, crocodiles detect subtle pressure changes through integumentary sensory organs clustered along the jawline and snout. These receptors are sensitive to vibration transmitted through water and damp substrate, often eliminating the need for overt head movement before a strike. By approximately 10:58 a.m., Arlo had closed to within an estimated 3 feet of the animal's head, well inside the effective strike range for a crocodile of that size. From that distance, the forward lunge requires only a short contraction of the hind limbs and tail to generate full extension. He adjusted his position slightly to improve the camera angle, aligning his head and upper torso directly in front of the snout. The strike occurred in less than 1 second. The crocodile pivoted sharply using its hindquarters and tail as a fulcrum, propelling its head forward in a straight-line burst. There was no hiss, no open-mouth display, and no prolonged warning. The jaws closed around Arlo's head and upper torso with immediate compression. The bite fractured the right side of the skull and compressed the cervical spine. Loss of consciousness would have been instantaneous due to catastrophic cranial trauma. Fishermen farther downstream later reported hearing a single sharp impact, followed by a heavy splash, but no sustained shouting. Maintaining its grip, the crocodile reversed direction using powerful tail strokes and slid back into the river. Investigators later documented linear drag marks across the mudbank, leading directly to the water's edge. Once submerged, the surface returned to near stillness within seconds, broken only by widening ripples drifting downstream. The tripod remained upright on the bank. The camera continued recording an empty stretch of mud and water, capturing only the fading disturbance on the surface before the battery depleted minutes later. Witnesses contacted emergency services at 11:10 a.m. Water police arrived approximately 45 to 50 minutes later, consistent with response times for that section of the river. No crocodile was visible at the surface. Saltwater crocodiles commonly store large prey underwater, wedged beneath submerged logs or vegetation until decomposition softens tissue. Investigators documented disturbances in riverbank vegetation consistent with prey caching behavior. Search teams located portions of Arlo's remains 3 days later, nearly a mile downstream in submerged brush. The coroner reported extensive cranial destruction, cervical spine fracture, and multiple deep puncture wounds consistent with a large Crocodylus porosus strike. The cause of death was listed as massive head trauma with immediate loss of brain function. Authorities classified the incident as a fatal wildlife encounter. No effort was made to remove or destroy the crocodile, as its actions were consistent with normal predatory behavior in an area clearly marked as hazardous. Arlo's camera was recovered downstream. The final video file ended seconds before the strike, confirming he had been actively recording when he crossed the boundary line. What remained was an empty shoreline and a sound no one watching could forget, proof that some animals don't need a struggle to kill. It was August 3, 2018, when the dry season had reduced Lake Malawi to its lowest levels in 5 years. The shoreline had receded significantly, exposing beaches that normally lay underwater. For 26-year-old Declan Ashworth, a recent university graduate from Cork backpacking through southeastern Africa, this remote stretch of lakeshore represented exactly the type of authentic experience he had been seeking. Declan had been traveling for 4 months on a tight budget, camping independently rather than staying at established lodges. He carried minimal gear in a borrowed backpack and relied heavily on advice from other backpackers rather than official tourism information. His African experience consisted entirely of budget camping and hiking, with no formal safari or wildlife education. Declan had arrived at the lakeshore 2 days earlier, setting up his tent in an area where several other independent campers had established an informal campground. The location was popular among budget travelers, specifically because it lay outside any official park or lodge, meaning no entrance fees or accommodation costs. Local fishermen had told the campers that swimming was generally safe in the shallow areas near shore, though they mentioned that crocodiles were known to inhabit the lake and occasionally moved close to shore during certain times of year. Nile crocodiles are Africa's largest freshwater predators, with mature males commonly exceeding 16 feet in length and weighing up to 1,650 pounds. They possess the strongest bite force of any living animal, generating pressures exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch. Crocodiles are ambush predators capable of remaining completely motionless for extended periods, submerged just below the surface with only their eyes and nostrils exposed. Their attack strategy relies on explosive acceleration from concealment, followed by powerful twisting movements designed to overwhelm prey. In large lakes, crocodiles often patrol shorelines where human activity overlaps with their hunting territory. Lower water levels during the peak dry season had concentrated crocodile activity closer to exposed shorelines, increasing the likelihood of encounters in areas frequented by swimmers and campers. Local fishermen were aware that large crocodiles regularly moved through the area, but these risks were not clearly communicated to the foreign campers, many of whom lacked sufficient local knowledge to recognize the danger. The afternoon of August 3rd was exceptionally hot, with temperatures exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Declan had spent several hours hiking along the exposed lake bed and was covered in dust and sweat when he returned to camp. Several other campers were wading in the shallow water near shore, cooling off in the lake. Surface glare and sediment stirred by recent storms reduced visibility close to the shoreline, making it difficult to see below the water's surface. Crocodiles exploit exactly these conditions. Murky shallows allow them to approach within striking range without exposing their full body. In lakes with fluctuating levels, prey patterns change, and crocodiles adjust accordingly, patrolling new shorelines that were previously too shallow to access. To an unfamiliar swimmer, the water appeared calm and waist-deep. To a crocodile, it was a confined hunting corridor, where escape options were limited and detection nearly impossible. Declan walked into the water to approximately waist depth, roughly 30 feet from shore. The water was refreshingly cool, and he bent forward to splash water on his face and rinse the dust from his hair. He was looking down at the water when the crocodile struck. The massive jaws surged upward from below, clamping around Declan's hips and lower torso with crushing force. The impact knocked him violently off balance as the crocodile's teeth drove deep into his body. Before Declan could react, the crocodile twisted, using its full mass to drag him off his feet. The force of the attack unfolded in seconds. The crushing pressure shattered bone and tore through vital tissue as Declan was pulled beneath the surface. Water flooded his airway as the crocodile hauled him away from the shoreline, the struggle marked only by violent splashing and a brief churn of disturbed water. Other campers on the shore screamed and scattered, unable to intervene. Within moments, Declan's body disappeared beneath the surface as the crocodile moved toward deeper cover. The water settled quickly, leaving only ripples and a spreading stain near the point of attack. Local authorities were notified within the hour, but recovery operations were postponed until the following morning due to the presence of multiple large crocodiles in the area. Search teams located partial remains the next day, cached beneath submerged root systems roughly 40 yards from shore. The condition of the remains was consistent with typical crocodile feeding behavior, in which prey is anchored underwater and consumed over an extended period. The investigation confirmed that low water levels had concentrated crocodile activity near popular swimming areas, and that informal warnings had not been adequately communicated to foreign campers. Malawian authorities increased patrols and installed warning signs at informal camping sites following the incident, though enforcement remained limited due to resource constraints. It was June 23, 2015, near a golf course retention pond in Kissimmee, Florida, where the humid night air hung thick and still over manicured fairways and artificial water features. The pond sat adjacent to a cart path that wound through the course, its dark surface reflecting nothing but the faint glow of distant streetlights. Autumn Reeves, a 27-year-old server at a nearby restaurant, had just finished a late shift with 2 co-workers and was walking home to save on gas. Mark Delaney, a 31-year-old bartender, had suggested cutting through the golf course to shave 10 minutes off their route. Kayla Nguyen, a 28-year-old server known for her cautious nature, had pointed out the no swimming, alligators present signs posted near the path as they approached the water's edge. The trio had made this walk before, always skirting the pond along the grass. But tonight, the path curved wide around a narrow inlet that extended into their route. It was nearly midnight, and the only sounds were the rhythmic chirping of frogs and the occasional splash near the far bank. Autumn had kicked off her sandals earlier, and as they reached the inlet, she paused. The water looked shallow, maybe knee-deep, and crossing directly would cut the distance significantly. Kayla reminded her about the signs they had passed. Autumn stepped into the water anyway, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft mud. The surface was calm except for small ripples spreading outward from her movement. She waded forward slowly, the water rising to her knees as she moved toward the center of the 10-meter crossing. American alligators are apex predators found throughout Florida's freshwater systems, including lakes, rivers, swamps, and man-made retention ponds. Adult females typically reach lengths of 8 to 10 feet and can weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. Alligators are ambush hunters, relying on stealth and explosive power to capture prey. They often lie motionless near the bottom or along shorelines, nearly invisible in murky water, waiting for movement or vibrations that signal potential food. Their jaws can exert over 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bone and hold struggling prey underwater. Once an alligator secures a grip, it performs a death roll, a violent spinning motion designed to disorient, drown, and dismember victims. June is peak nesting season for alligators in Florida, a time when females become highly territorial and aggressive. Wading into dark water at night during this period is one of the most dangerous activities a person can undertake in alligator territory. An 8-foot female alligator had been resting near the bottom of the inlet, positioned along a shallow shelf near a culvert outflow. The vibrations from Autumn's footsteps triggered an immediate response. The alligator angled toward her silently, its body moving with minimal surface disruption. Autumn had taken 5 or 6 steps when the attack came. The alligator lunged from the side, its jaws clamping onto her lower left leg just above the ankle. The bite was instant and crushing, teeth sinking through skin, muscle, and grinding against bone. Autumn screamed and fell forward into the water, her hands splashing as she tried to regain balance. The alligator pulled steadily backward, dragging her toward deeper water with powerful sweeps of its tail. She tried to kick with her free leg, but the animal's grip was unyielding. The alligator initiated the first death roll, its entire body rotating rapidly in the water. Autumn was pulled under, submerged completely as the roll continued. The grip shifted higher on her leg, now clamping mid-calf. Water filled her mouth and nose. The alligator surfaced briefly, then performed a second roll, this time dragging her toward the deeper center of the pond. Her arms flailed above the surface for a moment before disappearing again. Mark and Kayla screamed from the bank, calling for help, but there was no one nearby. The alligator maintained its hold and continued pulling Autumn into the darkest part of the pond. A third roll followed, and this time the animal did not surface. The water grew still except for faint ripples. Autumn remained submerged, held firmly in the alligator's jaws as it anchored near the bottom. The crushing pressure on her leg, combined with the inability to breathe, led to rapid incapacitation. She drowned within 2 to 3 minutes, her body going limp as the alligator continued to hold her underwater. Mark had already sprinted toward the nearest lit area to find help, while Kayla remained at the edge, shouting into the darkness. Emergency responders arrived within 15 minutes, but the pond was too dark and dangerous to enter immediately. A specialized wildlife team was called in, and recovery operations began at first light. Autumn's body was located several hours later in deeper water. An investigation by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission confirmed that the attack was consistent with typical alligator ambush behavior. The presence of the culvert, the time of night, and the nesting season all contributed to the heightened risk. The alligator responsible was later trapped and removed from the pond. The incident prompted the golf course management to install additional lighting and more prominent signage around all water features. It was March 15, 2017, and the scorching Dubai sun had already begun its relentless assault on the desert landscape by 9 a.m., setting the scene for a horrific animal attack. Liam Fawkes was a 29-year-old software developer from Portland, Oregon, with a curated life of adventure tourism and extreme sports. His colleagues knew him as the guy who had booked the most dangerous excursions on every vacation: bungee jumping in New Zealand, cage diving with sharks in South Africa, volcano hiking in Guatemala. This trip to Dubai was meant to be a brief stopover before heading to Nepal for a solo trek to Everest Base Camp. But Liam had insisted on squeezing in every possible experience the Emirates had to offer. His reputation for pushing boundaries had earned him both admiration and concern from friends back home. Liam often dismissed safety protocols as obstacles to authentic experiences. He had arrived at the Al Sara Desert Resort that morning, specifically seeking what he called real camel riding, not the sanitized tourist version with guides holding lead ropes. Dromedary camels stand up to 7 feet tall at the shoulder and can weigh over 1,400 pounds. Their powerful legs evolved to carry massive loads across unforgiving terrain. Most critically, these animals possess a kick force capable of fracturing multiple ribs and causing fatal internal injuries. Their legs become lethal weapons when the animal feels threatened or cornered. The facility's safety warnings were posted in 4 languages on a weathered sign near the entrance, explicitly stating that visitors must remain with guides at all times and never approach the animals unaccompanied. The head handler had personally briefed Liam's tour group about camel behavior, explaining that these animals could be unpredictable and that their size made them inherently dangerous. He specifically warned against sudden movements and emphasized that camels, despite their docile appearance, were prey animals with powerful defensive instincts. Liam had nodded along with the others, but was already eyeing a large male camel named Hakim, who stood slightly apart from the herd. The enclosure was separated by a low gate. As the guided portion of the tour concluded, Liam lingered behind while other tourists headed toward the gift shop. He approached the handler and asked about riding Hakim independently, claiming he had extensive experience with large animals from his childhood on a ranch, a fabrication designed to gain access. When the handler firmly declined and began walking toward the main building, Liam made his fatal decision. He waited until the handler was out of sight, then climbed over the low barrier to approach Hakim's enclosure. The attack unfolded with shocking speed and violence. As Liam attempted to grab Hakim's neck to pull himself up, the camel's ears flattened against his head, a clear warning sign that Liam didn't recognize. Hakim's massive head swung around, his lips curling back to reveal yellowed teeth as he issued a low, threatening grunt. When Liam persisted, trying to swing his leg over the camel's back, Hakim's response was immediate and devastating. The camel's hind leg shot backward with explosive force that caught Liam squarely in the center of his chest. The impact lifted him completely off the ground and sent him flying several feet backward before he crashed face first into the sand. The sound of the kick, a sickening thud followed by the sharp crack of breaking ribs, echoed across the facility. Liam lay motionless for several seconds before attempting to push himself up. Multiple ribs had been driven inward, puncturing lung tissue and rupturing internal vessels. Massive internal bleeding began almost immediately, blood already beginning to foam at the corners of his mouth. His breathing became rapid and shallow as his left lung began collapsing almost immediately, each breath producing a wet, rattling sound. He managed to roll onto his back, his face contorting in agony as he clutched at his chest, but the damage was already catastrophic. The handler heard his colleague's commotion and came running, immediately recognizing the severity of Liam's injuries. As Liam's breathing became increasingly labored, the handler called emergency services while his assistant attempted basic first aid. Liam remained conscious for nearly 10 minutes. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes, but paramedics quickly determined that Liam's injuries were beyond field treatment. He was rushed to the hospital, where emergency surgery revealed massive internal trauma, 7 fractured ribs, a completely collapsed left lung, severe damage to his spleen, and extensive internal bleeding. Despite 3 hours of surgery, Liam died from his injuries. The facility temporarily closed the camel's enclosure for investigation by local authorities, issued a revised safety protocol requiring guides to remain with visitors at all times, and reinforced barriers around all camel pens. Liam's body was repatriated to Oregon. It was September 2, 2015, on the scrubby outskirts of the Masai Mara in Kenya, behind a budget lodge where kitchen lights cast a harsh rectangle onto bare dirt. Beyond the lit service corridor sat the trash pit, a shallow depression approximately 15 feet across, ringed with bones, plastic, and food waste, fully exposed once cooking ended and staff moved indoors, an area frequently visited by wildlife after dark. Jonel Cruz was 29, a Filipino electrician working aboard a cruise ship, accustomed to months below decks surrounded by engine noise, heat, and diesel fumes. His work involved tracing electrical faults and restoring systems under pressure. Co-workers described him as steady and methodical. This was his first extended vacation in years, assembled from leave days and low-cost bookings. He carried a mid-range phone and a power bank, using the camera in continuous record mode rather than live broadcast to document the trip. Marek Lis, 31, worked in a warehouse in southern Poland, loading pallets, driving forklifts, and taking overtime whenever available. He traveled to Kenya after a late cancellation dropped airfare sharply. At home, he avoided risks, but consumed alcohol steadily that evening. Around other travelers, he drank quickly, laughed loudly, and stood closer than necessary. The lodge lay outside park boundaries, inexpensive and loosely regulated, with limited enforcement once night fell. The night was warm and windless. Insects filled the air, and the smell of grease, spoiled fruit, and discarded meat drifted steadily from the trash area. Soft whooping and chuffing sounds carried intermittently from the darkness, originating within 50 to 75 feet of the service corridor, close enough to be unmistakable. The sounds indicated hyenas were already nearby and stationary. Spotted hyenas are active hunters as well as scavengers, highly social and capable of coordinated attacks. Adults commonly weigh between 90 and 150 pounds, with dense forequarters, powerful neck muscles, and jaws adapted to crush bone. Near lodges, they become habituated to human light and waste patterns. Intentional feeding at close range is a documented trigger for investigative advances that can escalate rapidly to attack behavior. Warnings were visible. A laminated sign by the kitchen door banned wildlife feeding and restricted the trash area after dark. Earlier, a cook told Janelle and Marek that hyenas entered nightly and scraps were to be dumped and left alone. A night guard waved them away once, then disengaged when they returned carrying drinks. A fixed security camera above the service corridor covered the trash pit and surrounding ground. Janelle activated his phone camera behind the kitchen, holding it chest high in a continuous recording. He tossed meat scraps toward the edge. At least 4 hyenas were visible moving in and out of the light cone. One advanced more directly, head low, ears forward, stopping and starting. Marek stepped into frame, extending a scrap at arm's length. The hyena did not take it, and instead circled closer as additional eye reflections appeared beyond the pit. The first clear change captured on both cameras was the sudden absence of sound. Vocalization stopped almost simultaneously. Movement accelerated at once. Marek stepped backward without looking. He fell onto his left side, striking hip and elbow hard enough to knock his upper body partially out of frame. He did not regain footing before the animals reached him. The security camera captured the full approach from above. The nearest hyena bypassed Marek's hands and arms and drove its jaws into the lower body, closing over the groin through clothing and soft tissue in a single bite. Marek's legs kicked reflexively, heels scraping concrete, as a second hyena clamped onto the lower abdomen and pulled backward. The footage shows sustained traction rather than shaking, consistent with pack-feeding behavior. Janelle's recording jolted as he stepped forward, then froze. Within seconds, the abdominal wall failed under opposing force. The injury widened as the animals pulled in different directions, bracing with shoulders and necks. Blood spread rapidly across dirt and concrete. Marek's screams dropped to strained intermittent sounds as blood loss increased and breathing became shallow. He attempted to push up on one arm, but repeated bites to the pelvis and abdomen prevented leverage. Janelle moved closer. One hyena pivoted and bit into his forearm, canines penetrating deeply and maintaining grip. When he pulled back, the skin tore further under tension. Another animal clamped onto his right calf and shook laterally, causing immediate instability. Johnel collapsed to one knee and crawled backward, leaving a continuous smear of blood. The footage shows the hyenas briefly disengage, then reattach to Marek as his movement diminished. A kitchen worker triggered the lodge alarm after hearing sustained screaming, and the night guard radioed the nearest ranger post to report an active hyena attack. An armed ranger vehicle arrived approximately 11 minutes later, headlights sweeping the area. A warning shot was fired into open ground. The hyenas withdrew, some carrying tissue away from the illuminated zone. Marek was unresponsive when rangers reached him, with catastrophic abdominal and pelvic trauma immediately visible. Janelle remained conscious but unable to stand, bleeding heavily from deep bite wounds. The coroner later listed Marek's cause of death as rapid exsanguination from massive soft tissue destruction including torn groin structures and ruptured pelvic vessels. Death was consistent with hemorrhagic shock occurring within minutes of initial contact. Jonel was transported to a regional hospital and survived after emergency surgery, left with permanent nerve damage in the forearm and significant muscle loss in the calf. The service corridor was cleaned before morning operations. Security footage was duplicated internally before collection by authorities. Coverage never extended beyond a short local report. The lodge received a quiet fine and fenced the trash pit weeks later, a corrective measure directly prompted by the recorded footage. The trash pit was fenced weeks later, after footage showed how rapidly hesitation became fatal. May 12, 2014, and the remote ranch outside Kerrville, Texas, lay quiet under thin cloud cover, moonlight breaking across fenced pasture and hard-packed dirt. The air was warm, visibility uneven, and alcohol-fueled noise drifted across the property, while warning signs, locked gates, and empty enclosures stood ignored in the dark as night settled deeper and attention narrowed dangerously. Bowie Keel, 21, had been working at the ranch for 6 months. He had left Texas State University earlier that year after failing multiple courses and taken the ranch job for hourly pay and housing in a converted trailer behind the main barn. His duties involved fence repair, feed distribution, and basic maintenance. He was not assigned to direct handling of breeding stock. Supervisors had noted that Bowie often volunteered for high-risk tasks, particularly those involving the ranch's large flightless birds. Co-workers described him as comfortable moving close to the fences during feeding and prone to exaggerating his confidence around the animals. On the night of the incident, he had been drinking with friends near the rear service gate. A $50 dare to enter the ostrich enclosure was made and accepted. The ostrich pasture covered just over 2 acres of dry, uneven ground, bordered by a 6-foot livestock fence reinforced with steel posts. Reflective warning signs were mounted along the perimeter. No entry, breeding males, authorized staff only. During breeding season, ranch policy required 2 trained handlers for any enclosure access involving adult males, with 1 assigned strictly to distraction control. No one informed management that Bowie intended to enter. Inside the fence, the ground was hardened by weeks of heat. Shallow depressions from dust baths and dried runoff created uneven footing that was difficult to read in low light. Adult male African ostriches stand between 7 and 9 feet tall and weigh roughly 280 to 350 pounds. During breeding season, males defend territory around nesting scrapes and respond aggressively to direct approach. Their primary defense is a forward kick delivered while bracing with the tail for balance. The inner toe bears a rigid claw about 4 inches long. Most human injuries involve deep lacerations, fractures, or severe bruising rather than prolonged attack. At approximately 12:58 a.m., Bowie climbed over the fence and dropped into the enclosure. The impact of his boots sent dust outward across the compacted dirt. Roughly 30 yards away, the male ostrich turned immediately toward the movement. The bird began closing the distance at a controlled walk. Its neck extended upright, wings loosened slightly from their sides. The posture signaled territorial assessment rather than retreat. Bowie did not step back. He advanced across the uneven ground, adjusting his footing as his boots struck hardened ridges. He removed his cowboy hat and waved it once at chest height, creating a broad lateral motion. At approximately 8 to 10 feet, the ostrich stopped. It shifted its weight and lowered its center of gravity, tail pressing firmly into the dirt for balance. Bowie stepped forward again, reducing the distance to within several feet. The response was immediate. The ostrich leaned forward briefly, using its forelimbs to stabilize contact range, then drove one hind leg forward in a full extension. The kick landed high on Bowie's right inner thigh. The force came from both the muscular leg and the bird's body weight behind it. The claw tore through denim and soft tissue as the blunt portion of the foot delivered impact. Bowie was thrown backward onto the hard-packed ground. The ostrich disengaged at once and stepped several paces away, maintaining an upright posture but not pursuing. The claw had penetrated the medial thigh near the groin crease, severing the femoral artery. Blood loss began immediately as a heavy, continuous flow. Bowie rolled onto his side and pressed both hands against the wound, but effective compression in that location is difficult without precise placement. Within seconds, blood saturated his clothing and pooled beneath him. He attempted to sit upright but became pale and unsteady. Less than a minute after the strike, his movements slowed significantly as rapid blood loss reduced circulating volume. The ostrich remained several yards away, pacing near the fence line. Once Bowie ceased advancing, the bird did not re-engage. Emergency services were contacted at 1:02 a.m. Responders arrived approximately 20 minutes later and found Bowie unresponsive with no detectable pulse. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. The county medical examiner documented a deep penetrating laceration to the right medial thigh with complete transection of the femoral artery, extensive surrounding soft tissue damage, and fatal hemorrhage. The cause of death was listed as exsanguination due to vascular injury from an ostrich strike. Investigators concluded that unauthorized entry into the enclosure and direct provocation during breeding season were primary contributing factors. The ostrich was not euthanized, but relocated to a restricted enclosure with reinforced barriers. The ranch suspended limited public access later that year and was sold months afterward. Within the local ranching community, the incident was cited as a preventable fatality involving alcohol, policy violation, and a territorial animal responding with a single defensive strike. It was November 11, 2014, when the first afternoon thunderstorms of the wet season swept across Zimbabwe's Hwange National Park ecosystem. The landscape was transforming from brown to green as fresh grass emerged from the red earth. For 37-year-old Gregor Paulsen, a commercial pilot from Oslo, and his wife Astrid, 35, this private bush camp represented the authentic African experience they had researched for over a year. The couple had specifically chosen a small, unfenced bush camp rather than a large lodge, seeking a more immersive wilderness experience. The camp consisted of 6 canvas tents arranged around a central fire pit and dining area, with minimal infrastructure separating guests from the surrounding bush. Management provided safety briefings upon arrival, warning that elephants, lions, and buffalo regularly moved through the area. Guests were instructed to never wander beyond the camp perimeter without a guide, and to treat all wildlife as dangerous, regardless of appearance. Gregor and Astrid had arrived 2 days earlier and had been impressed by the wildlife visible from camp. Buffalo herds regularly grazed in open areas roughly 100 yards from the tents, and the couple had photographed the animals extensively from the safety of the camp boundary. Gregor had grown comfortable with the buffalo's presence, commenting repeatedly that they looked peaceful and reminded him of cattle. Cape buffalo are considered one of Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more hunter and tourist deaths than any other species, except hippopotamus. Adult bulls weigh up to 1,900 pounds and possess a temperament that makes them unpredictable and aggressive. They have excellent memories and are known to ambush threats, sometimes tracking perceived dangers for extended periods. Their massive horns can span up to 6 feet across and are fused at the base to form a solid shield capable of deflecting bullets. Despite their docile appearance when grazing peacefully, buffalo are responsible for numerous human fatalities annually across Africa. On the afternoon of November 11th, Gregor noticed a small cluster of mature buffalo bulls grazing at the edge of a larger herd particularly close to camp, roughly 60 yards from the dining area. He mentioned to Astrid that he wanted to get closer photographs, suggesting they walk together toward the animals. Astrid reminded him of the camp's warnings about leaving the perimeter, but Gregor dismissed her concerns, pointing out that the buffalo had been near camp for 2 days without showing aggression. Gregor grabbed his camera and began walking toward the grazing buffalo. Astrid remained at the camp boundary, calling after him to return. Camp staff noticed Gregor's movement and immediately began shouting warnings, but Gregor either didn't hear or chose to ignore them. He covered approximately 40 yards, bringing him within 20 yards of the nearest buffalo bull. The buffalo had been tolerating Gregor's approach, but when he stopped and raised his camera, the nearest bull lifted his head and locked eyes with the human. Buffalo interpret direct approach and sustained eye contact as potential threats, particularly from upright bipedal figures that trigger predator recognition. The bull lowered his head, displaying his massive horns in a clear threat posture. Camp staff were now running toward Gregor, shouting for him to back away slowly without turning around. But Gregor finally recognized his danger and did exactly what instinct demanded, but survival required he avoid. He turned and ran. Buffalo reacts strongly to retreating movement. Running confirms vulnerability and triggers pursuit. Unlike predators that rely on stealth, buffalo charges are direct and relentless once initiated. A human cannot outrun a bull at close range, especially over uneven ground. The proper response, backing away slowly without breaking eye contact, requires overriding instinct. Gregor's sudden flight removed any ambiguity about threat posture and converted the encounter from tension into attack within a single second. The buffalo charged immediately, his massive hooves pounding the ground as he accelerated. Despite weighing nearly a ton, the bull covered the distance with shocking speed. Gregor managed only a handful of running steps before the buffalo struck him from behind. The impact launched Gregor forward and he landed face down in the dirt. The buffalo's horns gored his lower back and flank as he tried to crawl away, the horn tips penetrating into the abdominal cavity and lifting him partially off the ground. The bull shook his head, throwing Gregor several feet through the air before charging again. A camp staff member carrying the property's rifle closed to within 15 yards and fired directly at the buffalo's shoulder. The round struck the bull's massive boss at a steep angle, the fused bone plate deflecting the bullet without penetrating the skull. The impact staggered the animal momentarily, and a second shot struck the thick muscle of his neck. The cumulative shock of two close-range impacts disrupted the bull's focus. He delivered one more strike with his horns before backing away, staring at the fallen human, then turning and trotting back toward the larger herd. Gregor had sustained massive internal injuries, the buffalo's horns having torn through his abdominal cavity and damaged vital organs. Camp staff provided first aid while radioing for emergency evacuation, but the nearest medical facility was over 2 hours away by road. Gregor died approximately 45 minutes after the attack, the internal bleeding too severe to control with available resources. The investigation confirmed that Gregor had violated camp safety protocols by leaving the perimeter and approaching dangerous wildlife. His death led to enhanced safety measures at similar unfenced bush camps, including more explicit warnings about buffalo behavior and the requirement that all guests sign detailed acknowledgement forms before being allowed to stay at such facilities. It was May 19, 2018, off Makaha Beach on the western shore of Oahu, Hawaii, where the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly under a pale dawn sky. The water was murky from an overnight swell that had churned sand and sediment into suspension, reducing visibility to less than a meter. Camille Porter, a 32-year-old marketing consultant from San Diego, had arrived on the island 3 days earlier with her boyfriend Leo Park, a 29-year-old surf instructor who had grown up in the area. Leo had suggested an early morning swim before his first lesson of the day, hoping to share the quiet beauty of the ocean before crowds arrived. Mia Castillo, a 31-year-old lifeguard and mutual friend, had joined them the previous evening and pointed out the shark sighting signs posted near the beach access the afternoon before. A large tiger shark had been reported by fishermen cleaning their catch at the far end of the beach. Mia had warned about the murky conditions and advised staying close to shore, but Camille was eager for a peaceful swim in open water. The trio walked down to the sand just after sunrise, the air warm and humid. Small shorebreak waves rolled in steadily, and tight schools of baitfish flickered near the surface, their silver bodies catching the early light. Camille wore a reflective anklet, a gift from Leo, that glinted as she waded into the water. Leo remained in waist-deep water near the beach, watching the sets roll in, while Camille moved farther out to chest and neck depth, her arms cutting smooth strokes through the cloudy water. Tiger sharks are among the ocean's most formidable predators, reaching lengths of 10 to 14 feet and weighing up to 1,400 pounds. They are opportunistic feeders with powerful jaws capable of crushing sea turtle shells and tearing through thick hides. Their teeth are serrated and designed to saw through flesh and bone with devastating efficiency. Tiger sharks are known for their curiosity and investigative behavior, often approaching potential prey with a bump or nudge before committing to a bite. They are most active during dawn and dusk, periods when light levels are low and prey is harder to identify. Murky water, baitfish activity, and reflective objects can all trigger investigatory strikes. Camille had moved approximately 30 meters from shore when a large shape began circling just beyond her field of vision. The shark approached slowly from deeper water, drawn by the splashing and the glint of metal around her ankle. A sudden bump struck her lower leg, firm and deliberate. Camille turned toward shore and began swimming in with steady strokes, her movements controlled but faster. The shark circled again, closing the distance. Its first bite came without warning, jaws clamping onto her lower calf and ankle. The serrated teeth punctured skin and muscle, grinding against bone. Camille attempted to plant her feet in the sand, but the shark maintained its grip and shook once, tearing tissue. She lost her footing and fell forward into the water. The shark released briefly, then returned on a shallow angle. The second bite targeted her mid-thigh, the jaws closing with immense pressure. Teeth sank deep into the femoral region, severing the femoral artery. Blood began pouring into the water in thick clouds. The shark shook again, its head twisting side to side before releasing and circling. Camille tried to kick toward shore, but her leg was unresponsive, and the water around her darkened rapidly with blood. The shark made a final pass, biting the same leg near the knee, then veered off into deeper water and disappeared. Unlike most tiger shark encounters that end after a single investigatory bite, this shark displayed unusually persistent behavior, likely provoked by the murky water, the flash of jewelry, and the presence of blood. Leo had seen the thrashing and was already moving toward her, calling out. He reached Camille within seconds, wrapping his arms under hers and towing her toward the beach. Her leg trailed limply, the water behind them stained red. Mia sprinted from the sand and helped drag Camille onto the shore, immediately applying pressure to the thigh wound. The damage was catastrophic. The femoral artery had been completely severed, and blood loss was rapid and uncontrollable despite their efforts. Camille's breathing became shallow and erratic, Her skin turned pale, and within minutes, she slipped into shock. Emergency services arrived within 10 minutes, but she was unresponsive. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but she was pronounced dead shortly after their arrival. An investigation by the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources confirmed the attack was consistent with tiger shark behavior. The murky water, dawn timing, bait fish presence, and reflective jewelry were all identified as contributing factors. Authorities closed the beach for 48 hours and posted additional warnings along the coastline. Camille's family released a statement expressing their heartbreak and gratitude for the efforts of Leo, Mia, and the emergency responders. They described Camille as adventurous and full of life, someone who loved the ocean and had always felt at home in the water. The incident reignited public discussions about shark safety in Hawaii, with local officials urging swimmers to avoid murky water, dawn and dusk hours, and areas with active fishing or baitfish schools. Memorial services were held in both San Diego and Oahu, and a scholarship fund was established in Camille's name to support ocean conservation education. It was March 23, 2018, in the ancient stones of a temple complex in Jaipur. 12-year-old Rohan Cheda would discover that the sacred monkeys his grandmother had told him stories about were far more dangerous than any childhood tale suggested. Rohan was the son of a textile merchant from Mumbai. He possessed an insatiable curiosity that both delighted and exhausted his parents, Vikram and Priya. The family had come to Jaipur for his cousin's wedding, and Rohan had begged to visit the famous monkey temple after hearing stories from relatives about the hundreds of rhesus macaques that lived there. His parents had agreed reluctantly, knowing their son's tendency to ignore boundaries when something captured his interest. He had secretly packed a small bag of peanuts in his pocket, planning to feed them despite his parents' warnings about maintaining distance. The family arrived at the temple just after noon, when the heat was beginning to drive most tourists to seek shade. The temple complex echoed with the constant chatter and screeching of over 300 rhesus macaques that had claimed the site as their territory. These animals are highly intelligent primates that possess canine teeth over half an inch long, designed for both defense and establishing dominance within their social hierarchy. These monkeys live in complex troops with strict pecking orders, and they become extremely aggressive when protecting food sources or when they perceive threats to their territory. The temple priests had posted signs in Hindi and English warning visitors not to carry visible food and to avoid direct contact with the monkeys, but the warnings were faded and partially obscured by years of monsoon damage. A local guide had specifically warned the Cheda family about the monkeys' aggressive behavior during feeding time, explaining that they had become increasingly bold and territorial due to years of tourist feeding. Vikram had listened carefully and instructed Rohan to stay close, but the boy was already distracted by the sight of monkeys swinging from temple spires. The guide positioned himself to intervene immediately if Rohan approached the monkeys, but was momentarily distracted by another group of tourists taking photographs. As the family moved through the complex, Rohan spotted a cluster of ripe mangoes that had fallen from trees near a water tank, where a large troop of monkeys had gathered. The fruit lay just outside what appeared to be the main feeding area, and several smaller monkeys were already investigating the windfall. Despite his father's firm grip on his shoulder, Rohan broke away when Vikram stopped to photograph a carved elephant statue. The boy moved quickly toward the mangoes, ignoring his mother's sharp call to return immediately. The monkeys nearest to the fruit immediately noticed his approach, their posture shifting from relaxed foraging to alert surveillance. What Rohan failed to recognize were the clear warning signs the monkeys were displaying. The largest male, a scarred veteran of countless territorial disputes, began making low, grunting sounds while staring directly at the approaching child. Other troop members started gathering behind their leader, a behavior that indicates preparation for group defense of resources. However, only a few monkeys were likely to physically engage, with the others mainly blocking the child or attempting to snatch food. When Rohan reached down to grab the largest mango, he unknowingly triggered the alpha male's protective instincts. The attack began with the alpha male's piercing shriek, a sound that immediately drew attention. The first monkey landed on his back, its claws digging through his cotton shirt and into his skin. The boy's startled cry was cut short as the alpha male bit down on Rohan's right hand, its canine teeth puncturing the flesh between his thumb and forefinger. Secondary monkeys attempted to snatch the mango and scratch at him. The assault was chaotic. Monkeys clung to his arms and torso, their teeth finding exposed skin with biting and clawing that caused scratches and punctures. Blood began flowing immediately from multiple wounds. His attempts to shake them off only caused deeper scratches as their claws raked across his skin. The alpha male maintained its grip on his hand, shaking its head violently and causing serious tissue damage to fingers and palm. Within 30 seconds, Rohan had sustained over 10 to 15 significant bite wounds, focused primarily on his hand and arms, with smaller lacerations on his scalp and shoulders. He fell backward and struck his head on a nearby stone step, rendering him unconscious. Other monkeys retreated when they sensed the threat from other humans approaching. Vikram and Priya reached their son, just as the temple priest arrived with a long wooden staff. The priest's aggressive shouting and the staff's threatening gestures drove the alpha male and nearby monkeys back into the trees. Rohan lay unconscious, his hand mangled and deep lacerations visible on his arms and scalp. Priya's anguished wails brought other visitors running. The priest immediately called the local medical clinic and police using his mobile phone. An ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, but paramedics found Rohan unresponsive with significant head injuries. Rohan survived long enough to reach intensive care, but brain swelling from head trauma and secondary infection from bite wounds claimed his life days later. The coroner's report identified head trauma from a fall as the immediate severe injury. Secondary infection from untreated bite wounds was noted as a contributing factor, alongside severe intracranial swelling caused by the fall. A local newspaper ran a brief warning about monkey aggression at local temples, and the temple management installed additional fencing around feeding areas and posted more prominent warning signs in multiple languages. The incident prompted discussions about controlling the monkey population at religious sites, but no significant action was taken due to the animal's protected status in Hindu tradition. It was July 21, 2017, on the lower Zambezi River in Zambia. The water ran high and opaque, swollen by seasonal flow and crowded with submerged sandbars, drifting reeds, and unseen channels beneath the surface. The air was heavy and still, broken only by insects and the slow movement of the river, a place where large animals held territory just below the waterline, and visibility ended inches beneath the surface. Sitting inside the canoe was Naledi Kojo, 34 years old, an administrative supervisor at a public secondary school outside Accra. Her work involved schedules, procurement paperwork, and disciplinary documentation, and co-workers described her as methodical and rule-focused. This was her first vacation outside West Africa, paid for over several years of savings, and taken after her children reached an age where extended travel was feasible. She traveled with her husband, Kwame, an electrical technician, and their 2 children, ages 9 and 11. Their itinerary avoided activities labeled high risk, with no walking safaris or night drives. The river canoe excursion was presented as routine and controlled, following established routes used daily. The launch briefing emphasized observation only, and nearby tourist boats were visible along the same stretch of river. The lower Zambezi that morning was flat, with slow surface movement masking depth and submerged channels, reflecting a pale sky with no visible current markers. Hippopotamuses are not passive river animals. Adults commonly weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds, can run faster than a human over short distances on land, and are responsible for more fatal encounters in Africa than any other large mammal. They defend submerged pathways and pod zones aggressively, and attack by surging upward from depth, using their jaws to crush rather than tear. The mouth can open nearly 5 feet wide, and the canines can exceed 20 inches. Light recreational watercraft offers no resistance to this force. There were visible warnings, captured in sequence on camera. A launch sign showing a hippo silhouette crossed by a red slash appeared in the opening frames, and earlier footage showed the guide redirecting another canoe that drifted too close to a pod downstream. Naledi noted hippos submerging one by one and asked about the behavior. The guide replied without turning, saying they were moving away. The canoe continued forward on residual glide. The water surface flattened abruptly, a change visible on camera within seconds. Reflected light vanished as ripples collapsed into a dull, uniform plane. No bubbles or wake appeared. The children leaned into frame as the guide lifted his paddle briefly, paused, then lowered it again. The hippopotamus breached directly beneath the canoe, entering the frame from below with no lateral approach. The head rose vertically, jaws opening as it broke the surface. The lower mandible contacted the underside of the hull first, lifting it, while the upper jaw closed through the canoe's centerline. The fiberglass failed instantly. The bow folded inward, and the image jolted as the hull separated. her torso driven upward while her hips and legs dropped below the waterline. The jaws closed once, producing a dense, compressed impact sound, consistent with bone and hull failure. Naledi's upper body was thrown forward and landed face down on the surface, motionless, while the lower half disappeared immediately as the animal submerged. There was no visible thrashing, and her arms remained slack. As the canoe collapsed, the footage shows her upper torso drifting and slowly rotating. Blood spread outward in a widening plume as the children screamed. Kwame entered the frame, attempting to secure broken canoe sections and calling her name, with no response visible. The guide entered the water on the opposite side and paddled backward to increase distance while calling for help. The hippopotamus surfaced again, roughly 60 feet away, exhaled audibly, then submerged. The camera recorded uninterrupted until the battery failed 12 minutes later, including the children's transfer to another canoe, and the guide pushing Naledi's remains away from the boats to prevent further contact. The guide radioed base immediately. Other boats arrived in approximately 18 minutes. No recovery attempt was made due to the presence of the animal and the condition of the remains. Rangers secured the area and escorted the family to shore. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as complete spinal transection at the L1 vertebra, with catastrophic vascular disruption. Death would have occurred instantly. No defensive injuries were documented. River operations were suspended for 3 days. The footage was collected by park authorities and used internally for training. Naledi Kojo's name appeared once in a regional paper in a brief notice. Her family returned home without her. Operating distances were formally revised, and enforcement during seasonal pod movement was recorded as mandatory rather than advisory. River operations resumed quietly after Naledi Kojo's name appeared once in a local notice. It was October 22, 2013. Beyond Mildura's city limits in northwestern Victoria, the land flattened into open paddocks broken only by wire fencing and scattered eucalyptus. The afternoon sun sat high and harsh, pushing temperatures into the mid-90s. Dry grass crackled underfoot. The soil was loose in some sections and baked hard in others, creating uneven footing. There were no natural barriers between the narrow rural road and grazing land. Heat shimmered above the ground, distorting distance and depth perception. With no shade and no immediate assistance nearby, isolation left little margin for error. Jory Dax, 29, worked night shifts at a grain warehouse on the outskirts of town. A former amateur kickboxer, he had lost 2 consecutive bouts the previous year and stepped away from competition. In the months that followed, he shifted his attention to short fight clips and challenge videos online. The content was low budget but direct. Training drills filmed in parking lots, improvised sparring sessions, and commentary about discipline and toughness. 3 months before the incident, Jory had undergone surgery to repair a ventral hernia caused by repetitive lifting at work. The incision ran low across his abdomen. Externally, it had healed. Internally, the repair site relied on layered sutures and reinforced tissue that required months to regain full tensile strength. His discharge paperwork advised avoiding heavy impact and abdominal strain. Co-workers described him as physically strong and unwilling to appear cautious, especially in front of a camera. That afternoon, Jory drove out with his co-worker Marcus Lee to film what he described as a novelty sparring segment, shadowboxing, in front of a wild kangaroo to test composure. Marcus parked the truck along a wire fence bordering a wide grazing paddock. There were no posted signs on that specific stretch of fence, but state advisories issued earlier that month had warned against approaching large solitary males during breeding season. The nearest hospital sat more than 30 miles away via rural roads with intermittent reception. Roughly 30 feet inside the paddock, a large male red kangaroo stood near the fence line. Adult males can stand close to 6 feet upright and weigh between 180 and 200 pounds. Their hind legs are designed for propulsion and defense, capable of powerful forward kicks. Each hind foot bears a central claw that can cause deep lacerations. However, most serious injuries to humans result from blunt force trauma, rib fractures, and secondary complications rather than immediate catastrophic penetration. Marcus stayed near the truck to film, keeping a distance. He told Jory not to get too close. Jory stepped through a low section of fence anyway and walked toward the kangaroo. The animal remained still at first. Its head tracked his movement. The paddock floor consisted of dry dirt over compacted clay. As Jory advanced, his boots shifted small clouds of dust. At approximately 8 to 10 feet away, the kangaroo straightened fully upright, its ears angled backward. its forearms lifted slightly. The thick tail pressed firmly into the ground for balance. This was a standard defensive posture. Jory raised his hands and began light shadowboxing motions, throwing small feints and slow, controlled jabs into the air, as if demonstrating restraint rather than aggression. Dust shifted beneath his boots as he adjusted his stance and edged forward again, closing the remaining space that separated him from the animal. What had been a cautious buffer only moments earlier shrank to just a few feet, well inside the range where a large male red kangaroo will interpret movement as a direct challenge. The kangaroo's posture shifted subtly before it reacted. It rose fully upright, ears pinned back, tail braced against the ground to form a stable tripod. In one fluid motion, it leaned forward and briefly gripped Jory's upper arms to fix the distance, then drove both hind legs forward in a coordinated double kick. The strike extended straight into his torso, powered by the hips and thighs in a single rapid burst. One hind foot struck high along Jory's lower ribs and upper abdomen. The impact was blunt and forceful. The central claw tore through his shirt and reopened the lower portion of the surgical site, while also penetrating several inches into the abdominal cavity. The primary injury came from the force of the legs driving into his torso. The blow lifted him partially off balance and threw him backward onto the hardened dirt. The kangaroo disengaged immediately and bounded several yards away, returning to a defensive upright stance without pursuit. On the ground, Jory rolled onto his side, clutching his abdomen. The external wound bled steadily but was not explosive. Beneath the surface, the impact fractured two lower ribs and disrupted recently repaired abdominal tissue. The repaired fascia along the hernia site partially separated under stress. The blunt force had also caused a deep laceration to the left lobe of the liver and torn multiple mesenteric vessels. Small blood vessels tore within the abdominal wall and deeper structures. Internal bleeding began to accumulate rapidly within the peritoneal cavity. He attempted to sit up. The movement increased intra-abdominal pressure and worsened the separation at the repair site, while accelerating blood loss from the liver injury. Within minutes, he became pale and diaphoretic. He complained of sharp abdominal pain and pressure beneath his ribs. Marcus, still filming at first, lowered the phone as Jory's breathing grew shallow. At 4:17 p.m., Marcus called emergency services, struggling to provide exact coordinates beyond the nearest road marker. Cellular signal fluctuated. Jory's condition deteriorated steadily rather than instantly. His blood pressure dropped as internal hemorrhage continued. He remained conscious but weak when paramedics arrived approximately 35 minutes later. Responders noted signs consistent with internal bleeding, pallor, cool skin, rapid pulse, and abdominal rigidity. During transport toward the hospital, he became unresponsive. Despite emergency surgery aimed at controlling hemorrhage and repairing torn tissue, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The coroner documented multiple rib fractures, disruption of a recent abdominal surgical repair, hepatic laceration with significant blood loss, mesenteric vascular injury, and significant internal hemorrhage. The fatal mechanism was hemorrhagic shock resulting from combined blunt force abdominal trauma, solid organ injury, and compromised abdominal integrity from recent surgery. Wildlife officials reiterated that red kangaroos typically avoid confrontation unless approached directly. The male involved was not euthanized, as the behavior was defensive and consistent with normal territorial response. The paddock remained unchanged. The fence still marked the boundary. Heat still pressed down on open ground with no shelter. The incident was cited locally as preventable, an example of reduced physiological resilience, combined with deliberate approach during breeding season. The kangaroo had reacted as designed. The escalation began with a step forward, despite warning signs, medical advice, and visible defensive posture. The live stream froze on a body that never stood back up. The comment feed still moving long after the man stopped breathing, but was soon deleted with the request of family members. It was May 23, 2017, when the late afternoon light turned golden across Botswana's Okavango Delta. The winter dry season had reduced water levels throughout the delta, concentrating wildlife along permanent channels. For 41-year-old Lisette Vandenberg, a freelance travel writer from Amsterdam, this luxury riverside lodge represented both a working assignment and a personal retreat. Lisette had been commissioned by a European travel magazine to write a feature article about premium Botswana safari experiences. Her 5-day stay at the lodge was complimentary in exchange for coverage, and she had spent 4 days photographing wildlife and interviewing staff. She was an experienced travel writer who had covered destinations across 5 continents, though her African experience was limited to 2 previous trips focusing on cultural rather than wildlife content. The lodge was positioned directly along a permanent water channel, with elevated wooden walkways connecting luxury tents to the main dining area. The location provided spectacular wildlife viewing, but the proximity to water meant dangerous animals regularly moved through the property. Management conducted safety briefings for all arriving guests, specifically warning about hippopotamus activity during evening and early morning hours. Signs posted throughout the lodge warned guests to remain on elevated walkways after dusk and never approach the water's edge. The lodge's safety briefing was delivered by the duty manager, who explained that hippos used predictable paths from water to grazing areas and could become aggressive without warning when surprised. He also noted that staff used ground-level service paths only during daylight and only after checking the channel for movement. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more human deaths annually than any other large mammal on the continent. Adult bulls weigh up to 4,000 pounds and can reach speeds of 30 miles per hour on land. Their massive jaws can open to 150 degrees, revealing canine teeth that can grow up to 20 inches long. These teeth are capable of biting through bone with devastating efficiency. Hippos spend daylight hours in water, but emerge at dusk to graze on land, following the same paths night after night. When humans block these paths or surprise hippos during their evening emergence, the animal's territorial aggression results in swift and brutal attacks. Lisette had photographed wildlife from the lodge's elevated viewing deck throughout her stay, but she had grown frustrated with the limitations of the elevated angle. On her final evening, she decided to capture photographs from the water's edge during the golden hour before sunset, believing the low angle would create more dramatic images for her article. She left the main lodge area at approximately 6:15 p.m., walking down a service path that led to the water's edge, roughly 40 yards from the elevated walkways. She had seen lodge staff use this path during the day and assumed it was safe. The light was perfect, and several hippos were visible in the channel, their heads and backs creating striking compositions above the water's surface. Lisette spent approximately 10 minutes photographing from the water's edge, crouching low to achieve her desired angles. She was focused entirely on her camera's viewfinder and failed to notice that dusk was approaching and that the hippos in the channel were beginning to move toward the shore. Their evening grazing period was beginning, and the path they used emerged from the water roughly 15 yards from where Lisette was positioned. The first hippo emerged from the channel without Lisette noticing, his massive bulk moving with surprising silence as he climbed the gentle slope. When Lisette finally stood up and turned around, she found herself directly between the hippo and the path he was following toward his grazing area. The bull hippo perceived Lisette as a threat blocking his established route. His territorial instinct triggered immediately, and he charged from less than 20 feet away. Lisette had no time to react before several thousand pounds of hippo struck her at full speed. Hippos rely on established routes between water and grazing areas, often using the same narrow exits night after night. Blocking that corridor, even unintentionally, is interpreted as interference with access rather than curiosity. Unlike predators responding to prey movement, a hippo responding to obstruction reacts with blunt, overwhelming force, meant to clear the path instantly. The short distance gave Lisette no margin for retreat. In hippo encounters, proximity determines survival more than awareness. The impact launched Lisette sideways, and she landed heavily on her side. The hippo's jaws opened wide and clamped down across her lower torso and ribcage, the canine teeth puncturing through bone. The crushing bite destroyed multiple ribs and drove into vital organs. The hippo shook his head once, violently, then released and stepped back. Lodge staff heard the commotion and came running from the main building, arriving to find Lisette motionless on the ground as the hippo moved past her body and continued toward his grazing area. The animal showed no further interest once she was no longer blocking his path. Emergency medical personnel reached the lodge via helicopter within 50 minutes, but Lisette had lost consciousness almost immediately and died shortly afterward from massive internal trauma and blood loss. The investigation revealed that she had violated lodge safety protocols by leaving the elevated walkways during the period when hippos emerged from water. Her camera was recovered from the scene, containing the final photographs taken minutes before the attack. The lodge enhanced its safety protocols following the incident, including locked gates preventing access to ground-level paths during evening hours. It was September 12, 2016, on a foothill trail near Golden, Colorado, where the Rocky Mountains rose sharply from the high plains, and the evening light cast long shadows across steep switchbacks. The trail wound through dense juniper and scrub oak along a narrow bench cut into the hillside. Grant Ellison, a 34-year-old software engineer from Denver, had driven out after work to log training miles before sunset. He was preparing for a fall marathon and had been running this route twice a week for the past month. The air was cool and dry, with a light breeze moving through the canyon. Grant had parked at the trailhead just after 6 in the evening, noting the recent lion sightings Keep Pets Leashed placard that Aaron Blake, a trail steward had posted that morning. Luis Ortega, a wildlife photographer, had mentioned to other hikers that he had seen fresh mule deer tracks and scat near the upper switchbacks, a sign that predators might be nearby. He had advised keeping noise levels up and staying alert. Grant had brought his small terrier mix along for the run despite the leash requirements. The dog ranged ahead on the trail, darting into brush and sniffing at rocks. Grant wore earbuds, listening to music as he ran, which reduced his awareness of his surroundings. The trail climbed steadily through areas of dense cover. Mule deer tracks were visible in the dust, and a squirrel gave a sharp alarm call as Grant passed. The sun was low on the horizon, and visibility dropped significantly in the shaded sections where juniper grew thick against boulders. Mountain lions are solitary and highly efficient predators found throughout the western United States. Adult males can weigh between 120 and 220 pounds, while females are smaller but equally dangerous. They are ambush hunters, relying on stealth and explosive speed to close distance on prey. Cougars have powerful hind legs capable of launching them up to 40 feet in a single leap, and their strong jaws are designed to grip and suffocate prey. They typically target the neck and head, delivering a crushing bite to the base of the skull or throat that severs the spinal cord or cuts off airflow. Cougars are most active during dawn and dusk, periods when their prey is also moving, and light conditions favor their hunting style. They are naturally wary of humans, but certain behaviors can trigger a predatory response. Running, especially with a small animal like a dog, can mimic the flight behavior of prey. Crouching, turning away, or appearing vulnerable can also provoke an attack. Grant was approximately 2 miles into his run when his dog rounded a sharp bend and began barking aggressively. Brush rustled on the uphill side. Grant rounded the corner seconds later, pulling out one earbud. A large cougar was crouched low near the trail edge, less than 10 meters away, its body tense and its eyes fixed on the movement. The animal had likely been stalking the dog or waiting in ambush near a game trail. Grant froze for a brief moment, then turned and began running downhill. The sudden flight triggered an immediate chase response. The cougar sprang from its position and closed the distance in seconds. Grant had covered maybe 10 meters when the cougar struck him from behind. The impact knocked him off his feet and sent him sprawling onto the trail. The cougar landed on his back, its claws digging into his shoulders and upper back. Its jaws clamped onto the base of his skull and neck, the canine teeth penetrating deep into the tissue. The bite was precise and devastating, designed to sever the spinal cord. Grant's body went rigid as the pressure on his neck increased. The cougar maintained the bite while its hind legs raked across his lower back and sides, the claws tearing through his shirt and into the skin. The force of the bite crushed vertebrae and severed major blood vessels in the neck. Blood began pooling beneath him on the dirt trail. Grant attempted to push himself up, but his movements were weak. The cougar adjusted its grip, biting down harder. The dog had fled down the trail and was barking from a distance. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds. The cougar released its grip and stepped back before slipping into the dense cover. Grant lay face down on the trail, blood spreading rapidly from the neck wounds. His breathing was shallow and irregular, and within a minute it stopped entirely. The combination of spinal trauma, massive blood loss, and airway compromise resulted in death within minutes. 2 other trail runners came upon the scene roughly 10 minutes later, finding Grant's body and the dog circling nearby. They immediately called emergency services and attempted CPR, but he had been dead for several minutes. Colorado Parks and Wildlife officers arrived within the hour and confirmed the attack based on the injuries and tracks. The trail was closed indefinitely. Wildlife officers determined that the off-leash dog, the use of earbuds, and running at dusk in an area with recent sightings had all contributed to the fatal encounter. The cougar was tracked and euthanized the following day due to the severity of the attack and its proximity to populated areas. Grant's family released a statement describing him as passionate about the outdoors and dedicated to his fitness goals. They expressed hope that his death would serve as a reminder about the importance of following wildlife safety guidelines, particularly in areas with known predator activity. It was March 14, 2016, and the narrow streets near the border of Villa Madalena and Consolacion buzzed with the usual afternoon chaos. Children weaving between parked cars, vendors shouting prices over sputtering radios, the smell of frying oil drifting from corner stalls. 10-year-old Tiago Ventresca had already been scolded twice that day for wandering too far from his apartment building. Tiago was known throughout the neighborhood as the boy who never listened. His mother, Maria, worked double shifts at a textile factory, leaving him in the care of his elderly grandmother, who struggled to keep up with his boundless curiosity. Local residents mentioned that he had been caught climbing construction scaffolding, chasing stray cats into traffic, and attempting to feed pigeons from third-story window ledges. That afternoon, Tiago had been specifically forbidden from playing near the Oliveira house on Rua Augusta, where a pit bull lived behind a chain-link fence. The dog belonged to Carlos Oliveira, a mechanic who had rescued the animal from a fighting ring 2 years earlier. Despite Carlos's efforts at rehabilitation, Rex remained deeply traumatized and aggressive towards strangers. The neighborhood children had been warned repeatedly to stay away from the property. No secondary fencing or locked gates had been installed, a clear containment failure. Pit bulls possess exceptionally strong jaw muscles and a grip-and-hold bite style that allows them to maintain pressure once they latch on. Originally bred for bull baiting, they exhibit a behavioral trait called gameness, the tendency to continue an attack despite pain or distraction. The warnings had been constant and were later corroborated by neighbor testimony and municipal animal control records. A lady who lived next door to the Oliveiras had personally told Tiago's grandmother about the dangerous dog at least 3 times. Police and municipal animal control records, as well as neighbor testimony, documented at least 2 prior bites to adults who had gotten too close to the fence. Even the local mail carrier had switched to leaving packages at the building entrance rather than approaching the Oliveira gate. That morning, Tiago's grandmother had specifically reminded him about the house with the chain-link fence and made him promise to stay away. She had no realistic way to physically restrain him, but as Tiago played soccer with friends in the narrow street, the ball rolled directly toward the Oliveira property. His friends hung back, remembering their parents' warnings, but they said that Tiago approached the fence. Through the metal links, they could see the dog lying in the shade of a small concrete shelter. The dog appeared calm, almost sleepy in the afternoon heat. Tiago proceeded to climb the fence. The attack began the moment Tiago's sneakers touched the ground inside the fence. Rex moved with explosive speed, covering the 15 feet between his shelter and the intruder in less than 2 seconds. The dog's jaws clamped onto Tiago's neck beneath the jawline, canine teeth tearing into soft tissue. The crushing force collapsed his airway while severing a carotid vessel, causing rapid blood loss and oxygen deprivation. The pit bull's instinctive response was to shake his head violently from side to side, a behavior designed to break the neck of prey animals. Tiago's body was partially lifted off the ground and dragged due to his small size and the dog's strength. Tiago likely lost consciousness within seconds. Severe blood loss and airway obstruction made survival impossible, and despite frantic attempts to intervene, irreversible injuries led to death within minutes. His arms flailed weakly for several seconds before going limp. A woman who had been hanging laundry on her balcony witnessed the entire attack and began screaming for help while fumbling for her cell phone. Other neighbors rushed to the fence, shouting and throwing rocks at the dog, but it maintained its grip. Carlos Oliveira, hearing the commotion from his garage, ran toward the yard with a crowbar, but by the time he reached the scene, Tiago had already lost consciousness. The mechanic struck his own dog repeatedly before finally releasing his hold. Paramedics arrived 6 minutes later to find Tiago lying motionless in a pool of blood, his neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Despite immediate attempts at resuscitation, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner's preliminary report noted massive trauma to the cervical spine, severe crushing injuries to the neck with arterial rupture and airway collapse, and significant damage to the trachea consistent with a large dog attack. The dog was euthanized the following day, and Carlos Oliveira moved away within the month. The community installed higher fences and stricter regulations about dangerous animals, including mandatory registration, muzzling in public, and locked enclosures for aggressive dogs. It was November 8, 2014, at the edge of a mid-range safari lodge in Botswana's Okavango Delta. Night had settled in, and the air was heavy with heat and insects. Floodlights cut narrow paths through the darkness, leaving wide stretches of bush in shadow. Beyond the lit walkways, tall grass and shallow water blurred together, alive with movement and unseen wildlife just outside the lodge's open perimeter. One of the safari guests that week was Peter Voss, 52, a regional machinery sales representative from South Africa, who spent most of the year driving between farming towns selling industrial compressors and irrigation pumps. He was not publicly known and maintained no active online presence. Co-workers described him as reliable during working hours and excessive after them, drinking heavily at trade shows and treating company trips as opportunities to abandon routine limits. The safari was awarded after he closed a difficult regional contract, 4 nights at a Delta lodge with guided vehicle drives included. Peter showed no documented interest in wildlife activities and treated the trip primarily as a social event centered on alcohol consumption rather than scheduled excursions or guided viewing. He arrived with 11 co-workers, none personally close. By the 3rd night, Multiple witnesses later described him as visibly intoxicated, lingering near the fire pit after dinner, while others returned to their rooms. He skipped the afternoon game drive and spent several hours drinking. Staff stopped serving him alcohol earlier in the evening, after which he returned carrying additional alcohol from his room. Security footage later showed him walking alone toward movement near the unfenced boundary without staff accompaniment. The lodge sat on open delta terrain, floodplains giving way to tall grass and scattered acacia, with no physical barrier separating guest walkways from active wildlife corridors. November nights remained warm. Insects were active, and the ground, compacted by foot traffic, retained surface moisture from receding seasonal floodwater. Solitary bull elephants routinely moved through the area after sunset, following established paths between feeding zones and water access points. Adult bull elephants can exceed 12,000 pounds and are capable of rapid acceleration over short distances, reaching speeds near 25 miles per hour. Solitary males are more likely to investigate unfamiliar light, sound, or movement, and escalation risk increases when stimulation continues. A single forefoot can exert several tons of downward force. Documented warning behaviors include ear extension, head shaking, foot stamping, and short false charges intended to drive threats away without contact. When those signals fail, physical engagement follows immediately and forcefully. Earlier that evening, staff instructed guests to remain within illuminated paths after dark. A ranger radio message confirmed that a bull elephant had been observed moving south of the lodge less than an hour earlier. When Peter reached the edge of the lit area, several co-workers noticed a large silhouette and stepped back. The elephant moved partially into view, ears extended outward. Peter raised his phone and activated the flashlight, directing the beam toward the animal's head while shouting incoherently. The elephant advanced several yards and stopped, stamping once. That false charge prompted everyone else to retreat. Peter remained where he was and raised the phone again. The fixed security camera captured the escalation in a single wide frame. The elephant accelerated without further display, closing the remaining distance in seconds. Peter turned only as the animal reached him. The elephant struck with its head and shoulder mass, knocking him backward onto the compacted ground. He fell supine, arms failing to brace his fall. The bull immediately stepped forward and trampled. The first forefoot came down across the upper torso, compressing the chest. The footage shows visible collapse of the ribcage under the animal's weight. Peter's legs kicked briefly, then went slack. The elephant shifted its stance and brought a second step down across the midsection, driving force into the abdomen and pelvis. Blood appeared at the mouth and nose almost immediately, spreading onto the ground beneath his head. The elephant continued forward momentum rather than pausing. A final step landed across the lower chest and shoulder area as the animal moved over him, crushing remaining thoracic structure. Peter's body did not rise or roll. There was no coordinated movement after the second impact. The bull did not vocalize, trumpet, or linger. It continued along its established path into the grass beyond the lodge, exiting the frame within seconds. No one approached until the elephant was fully out of view. A lodge manager contacted wildlife authorities and emergency medical services via satellite phone, and guests were instructed to remain indoors. Dispatch records later confirmed responders were mobilized within 3 minutes. Rangers and paramedics arrived 27 minutes after the incident. Peter was pronounced dead at the scene, with no resuscitation attempted due to catastrophic trauma. A subsequent coroner report listed the cause of death as massive blunt force trauma from trampling, including extensive rib fractures, internal organ rupture, and secondary cranial injury from ground impact. Death was assessed to have occurred within seconds of initial chest compression. Toxicology results showed a significantly elevated blood alcohol concentration. In the days that followed, the lodge cooperated with authorities and reviewed the footage internally. Coverage remained limited to a brief local notice describing a wildlife-related fatality. Peter's family declined public comment. The lodge installed additional perimeter lighting, reinforced guest movement restrictions, and imposed stricter nighttime alcohol controls. The security camera remained in place, continuing to record without modification, its frame holding only what was left behind. It was June 14, 2015 in Hayden Valley, where geothermal runoff cut through wide grassland and herds of bison moved between grazing areas. Afternoon heat shimmered above the plain. Tourist traffic was heavy, and vehicles lined multiple roadside pullouts. Rangers had issued routine reminders that week to maintain distance from large animals, particularly during peak heat hours when agitation increases. Kaylin Vane, 22, worked seasonally at a lodge near the park. Outside of work, she produced lifestyle and outdoor content built around minimalist imagery, slow movement, soft lighting, and stillness in expansive landscapes. Co-workers later stated she had mentioned needing a distinctive post after engagement on her account had plateaued. Earlier that afternoon, Kaylin assembled a flower crown from wild buttercups gathered near the roadside. She mounted her smartphone onto a handheld motorized gimbal designed to stabilize moving footage. The device allowed smooth tracking even while walking across uneven ground. She drove alone into Hayden Valley and parked at a roadside pullout where several vehicles had already stopped. Approximately 60 yards from the pavement, a solitary bull American bison grazed with its head down. Adult males can weigh up to 2,000 pounds and stand over 6 feet at the shoulder. Though they often appear slow while feeding, they can accelerate quickly over short distances with minimal visible preparation. Their primary defensive response involves a forward charge combined with an upward horn thrust powered by heavy neck and shoulder musculature. Park guidelines require visitors to remain at least 25 yards from bison at all times. Multiple visitors later reported seeing Kaylin step off the pavement and move into the grass while filming herself walking. At least one group shouted for her to stop and referenced the posted distance rule. She continued forward, glancing between the screen and the animal, adjusting her framing. The terrain between her and the bull consisted of uneven prairie grass interspersed with compacted soil. Subtle dips in the ground made the distance appear shorter from certain angles. As she closed in, the bull maintained a feeding posture, but shifted position slightly within a shallow dirt depression. After roughly 20 minutes of intermittent filming from varying distances, the bull paused fully within the depression, lifting its head briefly before lowering it again. Recovered video later showed Kaylin placing the gimbal on a stable rock approximately 15 feet from the animal. She activated a delayed recording timer and stepped into frame from the side. Rather than remaining lateral to the animal, she repositioned gradually into its frontal arc, aligning herself roughly 10 to 12 feet in front of the bull's head for symmetry in the shot. The bull's head lifted. The tail rose and lashed twice. Ears rotated backward sharply. A low rumble vibrated through the ground, audible on the recording as distorted bass. The animal shifted its weight forward, hooves repositioning in the dirt. Kaylin hesitated but did not retreat. The charge began without further display. The bull pivoted and accelerated forward in a short burst, covering the remaining distance almost instantly. One horn struck Kaylin high along the left hip and pelvis. The upward thrust lifted her off the ground. The rotation of the neck amplified the force, launching her several feet backward. The gimbal was struck and toppled, but the camera continued recording from ground level. Kaylin landed supine on compacted soil. The fall, combined with the horn impact, produced extensive pelvic fractures and multiple lumbar vertebral fractures. The spinal cord sustained severe trauma at the lower lumbar level. She retained some involuntary reflex movement in her upper body, but coordinated escape was impossible. The bull closed the remaining distance and stepped forward. One front hoof came down onto her upper chest. Unlike a stomp, the movement involved gradual weight transfer. A single forelimb of a mature bull can bear several hundred pounds during stance adjustment. As the animal shifted forward to regain balance after the charge, the hoof remained planted over her thorax. The downward compression fractured multiple ribs bilaterally. The rib cage collapsed inward, puncturing both lungs and lacerating major vessels within the chest cavity. Blood filled the pleural space rapidly. The heart, compressed between fractured ribs and spine, struggled to maintain output. Internal hemorrhage combined with tension pneumothorax and pulmonary contusion caused rapid cardiovascular collapse. Audio captured through the fallen microphone recorded a muffled cracking sound and a brief, wet exhalation, followed by ambient wind and distant voices. The bull maintained position momentarily before stepping off and turning uphill. There was no repeated goring and no extended trampling sequence. The behavior was consistent with defensive removal of a perceived threat within close range. Witnesses inside a nearby vehicle contacted park authorities at 2:14 p.m. Several other vehicles had stopped along the road, causing congestion that delayed ranger access. Park personnel arrived approximately 18 minutes later and confirmed there were no signs of life. The coroner documented fatal blunt force chest trauma with massive internal hemorrhage, bilateral hemopneumothorax, cardiac compression, extensive pelvic fractures, and severe spinal trauma. Death was determined to have occurred within minutes following thoracic collapse and circulatory failure. There were no defensive wounds consistent with prolonged struggle. The smartphone and gimbal were collected as evidence. The footage was retained in federal custody and not released publicly. Selected still frames were later incorporated into internal training materials focused on distance violations and frontal arc positioning. Wildlife officials concluded the bull's behavior was a normal defensive response to close proximity. The bison was not euthanized. Within days, the site showed no visible trace of the incident. The valley remained open to visitors, the grass continuing to move in the wind as it had that afternoon. The footage ended with the sound of labored breathing and silence, a reminder that size alone can turn a moment of vanity into fatal force. It was July 19, 2015, when the winter sun hung high over a private self-drive game reserve in South Africa's northwest province. The dry season had transformed the Bushveld into a landscape of golden grass and scattered acacia trees. For 34-year-old Theron Breitenbach, a software developer from Cape Town, this self-drive safari represented a long-awaited opportunity to test his new camera equipment worth over $8,000. Theron had planned this trip for 6 months, convincing his girlfriend Mariska to join him for the 3-day weekend expedition. He had studied photography for 2 years and was building a portfolio he hoped would transition into professional wildlife work. The self-drive format appealed to him because it allowed unlimited time at sightings without the constraints of guided group tours. Self-drive safaris operate throughout several South African reserves, allowing visitors to navigate marked roads in personal vehicles while maintaining required safety protocols. Regulations explicitly prohibit exiting vehicles, except at designated rest camps. Signs throughout the reserve warn that animals are dangerous and unpredictable. Despite these warnings, incidents occur regularly when visitors disregard basic safety rules. Rangers routinely documented near-miss incidents involving tourists leaning out of vehicles, attempting selfies, or inching closer for better angles. In most cases, the animals simply ignored the behavior. That inconsistency created a dangerous illusion that predators resting in daylight were indifferent to human presence. In reality, lions evaluate movement rather than intention. A stationary vehicle is often dismissed as a large, unfamiliar but non-prey object. A solitary human on foot, especially one bending or running, triggers an entirely different behavioral category. Before entering the reserve that morning, Theron and Mariska had stopped at a small gate office where a staff member reviewed the basic rules for predators. The staff member emphasized that lions resting near roads could rise and close distance faster than most people could react, and that exiting a vehicle for any reason around predators was treated as a serious violation. The couple had been driving for approximately 3 hours when they spotted a pride of lions resting roughly 40 yards from the road. Theron immediately stopped the vehicle and began photographing through the open window. He was using a professional telephoto lens mounted on his new camera body, the combined weight making the equipment awkward to handle in the confined vehicle space. The pride consisted of 2 adult females and 4 subadults, all resting in scattered shade beneath a large marula tree. The lions showed minimal interest in the vehicle, occasionally glancing toward the road before returning to their rest. Theron spent nearly 20 minutes photographing the pride from various angles, growing increasingly frustrated with the vehicle's window frame interfering with his shots. Another self-drive vehicle approached from behind and stopped at a cautious distance, its occupants remaining seated with their windows mostly raised. After less than a minute, the driver backed slowly away to avoid crowding the pride. Theron watched the other vehicle leave and took it as overcaution. To him, the lions looked sleepy, almost bored, but the empty road also meant no buffer, no second vehicle to split attention, no extra eyes to spot a sudden shift in posture. What felt like control was actually isolation. African lions are apex predators weighing up to 420 pounds, with males considerably larger than females. Their hunting strategy relies on explosive acceleration from rest, reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour within seconds. Lions possess exceptional binocular vision optimized for detecting movement, particularly behaviors resembling prey animals. Their powerful jaws deliver bite forces exceeding 650 pounds per square inch, while retractable claws measuring up to 3 inches can inflict devastating wounds. When prey-like behavior triggers their hunting instinct, the response is immediate and overwhelming. Theron was repositioning his camera when his grip slipped. The expensive equipment tumbled from his hands, falling through the open window and landing in the dirt roughly 6 feet from the vehicle. He stared at the camera for several seconds before reaching for the door handle. Mariska reached across the center console, grabbing his arm and pulling him back toward his seat. Theron pulled free and opened the door. He stepped out of the vehicle, leaving the door open behind him as he moved quickly toward his fallen camera. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. He bent down and grabbed the camera, brushing dirt from the lens housing. That was when the nearest lioness lifted her head. The sudden human movement at ground level triggered her attention. Theron was crouched low, his posture and motion resembling prey behavior. The lioness rose to her feet, ears forward, her focus locked entirely on the movement. The change was subtle but immediate. Her posture shifted from passive rest to forward engagement, weight transferring toward her front limbs. Lions conserve energy during the day, but when prey-like motion appears within range, hesitation disappears. Theron was now exposed and on foot, upright, and moving erratically in open ground. From the lioness's perspective, the situation had simplified into opportunity rather than curiosity. The short distance meant there would be no extended stalk, only a direct burst of acceleration. Theron turned back toward the vehicle. His movement away from the lioness resembled fleeing prey, and the predator's instinct took over. She charged, covering the 40 yards in approximately 4 seconds. Mariska remained inside the vehicle, unable to intervene. Theron managed 2 running steps before the lioness struck him from behind. Her momentum drove him face first into the ground, the camera flying from his hands. Her claws raked across his back as she landed on him, her weight pinning him flat. Her initial bite targeted the back of his neck and the base of his skull, but her jaws slipped across his shoulder, failing to find a secure hold. She released and repositioned in a fraction of a second, clamping down across his throat with crushing force that collapsed his airway and severed major blood vessels. The lioness held the bite for several seconds, then released as Theron's body went still. She remained standing over him, watching for movement. When none came, she stepped back and lingered nearby for nearly a minute, her attention shifting between the motionless body and the vehicle where Mariska sat. Eventually, the lioness turned and moved back toward the Pride, settling into the shade without further investigation. Mariska used the vehicle radio to call for help. Rangers already patrolling the sector reached the scene approximately 20 minutes later. Theron had lost consciousness within seconds of the throat bite and died shortly afterward from rapid blood loss. The investigation confirmed he had violated reserve regulations by exiting his vehicle in the presence of dangerous animals. His camera was recovered from the scene with superficial damage but remained functional, containing the final photographs taken minutes before his death. It was August 14, 2016, in the Gallatin Range near the Yellowstone boundary in Montana, where the rugged wilderness stretched across steep meadows and dense willow thickets. The air was warm and still, carrying the scent of wildflowers and something heavier, the unmistakable odor of decay from a partially buried elk carcass hidden in a shallow draw. Noah Briggs, a 29-year-old graphic designer from Bozeman, had driven out with 2 close friends for a weekend hike to a scenic overlook popular among locals. Jake Morales, an impulsive IT support specialist, had been cracking jokes all morning and pointing out wildlife through binoculars. Priya Desai, a practical ER nurse, had read the bear safety pamphlet aloud at the trailhead, emphasizing the importance of staying at least 100 yards from bears and carrying bear spray. None of them had brought any. The trio left the marked trail and ventured toward the edge of a meadow where Jake had spotted a grizzly cub moving through the brush about 70 meters away. Noah, eager to capture a close-up photo for their friend group's ongoing wildlife challenge, edged closer through waist-high willows while Jake filmed from behind. Fresh bear scat dotted the ground, and trampled vegetation suggested recent activity. The wind shifted, carrying their scent directly down into the draw where the carcass lay concealed. Warning signs at the trailhead had been clear about recent bear activity in the area, but the group had dismissed them in their excitement. The meadow sloped gently toward dense brush, and visibility dropped sharply where willows grew thick. Noah moved slowly, pausing to frame his shot, unaware he was positioning himself directly between the cub and its mother. Grizzly bears are among North America's most powerful predators, with adult females weighing between 300 and 450 pounds and possessing immense strength capable of overturning boulders and tearing through logs. Sows with cubs are especially defensive, perceiving any close approach as a direct threat to their offspring. They rely on surprise and overwhelming force to neutralize danger, often launching explosive charges that cover ground at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour. Their jaws can exert over 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, easily crushing bone. Grizzlies also have a highly developed sense of smell and fiercely guard food sources. The combination of a cub, a carcass, and an approaching human created the most dangerous scenario possible in bear country. When Noah stepped within roughly 10 meters of the cub, brush snapped sharply underfoot. The adult sow rose from cover inside the draw, her massive frame suddenly visible. At a distance of about 20 meters, she launched a bluff charge, huffing and popping her jaws. Noah backed up only a few steps, keeping his phone raised and his body facing the bear. The sow committed to a full charge, closing the gap in seconds. Her first strike came as a powerful forepaw swipe that knocked Noah off his feet and sent him sprawling onto uneven ground. Before he could react, the bear was on top of him, delivering rapid bites to his upper torso and shoulder. The entire attack lasted less than 20 seconds, a violent, chaotic blur consistent with a defensive sow reacting to a perceived threat to her cub. Such encounters are not prolonged hunts, but explosive bursts of force intended to neutralize danger as quickly as possible. Her claws raked across his chest, tearing through fabric and flesh with devastating efficiency. Deep lacerations opened across his ribcage, exposing muscle and bone. She pinned him briefly with her weight, then broke contact and circled. As Noah struggled to rise to his hands and knees, the sow charged again. This time her jaws clamped onto his neck, crushing vertebrae and severing major blood vessels. A second bite targeted his chest, puncturing the thoracic cavity and causing massive internal hemorrhaging. Her teeth penetrated deep, collapsing a lung. The attack lasted less than a minute. The sow disengaged abruptly, collected her cub, and disappeared into the dense cover. Noah lay motionless on the trampled grass, blood pooling rapidly beneath him. His friends, frozen in shock several meters away, finally rushed forward and attempted to apply pressure to the wounds, but the damage was catastrophic. Arterial bleeding could not be controlled, loss of consciousness came within minutes, and Noah was unresponsive by the time they reached cell service and called for help. Park rangers and wildlife officials arrived by helicopter within the hour, but Noah was pronounced dead at the scene. An investigation by Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks confirmed that the attack was defensive in nature, triggered by the close proximity to the cub and the nearby carcass. Rangers noted the absence of bear spray among the hikers as a major preventable factor. The substance has proven effective even during surprise encounters when deployed quickly. The sow was not pursued or destroyed, as her behavior was consistent with natural maternal defense. Biologists noted that the presence of the elk carcass had likely kept the bear family in the immediate area, heightening the sow's protective instincts. Noah's family released a brief statement expressing their grief and urging others to respect wildlife distances and carry bear spray in grizzly country. His parents described him as adventurous and kind, someone who loved the outdoors but had underestimated the risks that day. The incident drew widespread attention on social media, with outdoor safety advocates using it as a cautionary example of the dangers posed by ignoring posted guidelines and approaching wild animals for photographs. Local hiking groups organized memorial hikes in Noah's honor and distributed bear safety information at trailheads throughout the region. It was October 14, 2017, when the autumn leaves of downtown Asheville painted Pack Square in brilliant oranges and reds, the same colors that would soon stain the pavement as Derek Katz made the final mistake of his 37 years. Derek was a man who had built his reputation on never backing down from anything. As a construction foreman for Mountain Ridge Development, he was known for taking on the most dangerous jobs, scaling half-finished high-rises without safety harnesses, working with heavy machinery in conditions that made other workers nervous. He had moved to Asheville from Detroit 5 years earlier, seeking the outdoor lifestyle. That particular Saturday, Derek had come to the farmer's market to meet his girlfriend, who sold handmade jewelry at a booth near the courthouse. When the bear first appeared at the edge of the square, most vendors and shoppers began backing away slowly, following the shouted instructions of an off-duty park ranger who happened to be browsing the vegetable stands. Black bears, despite their fearsome reputation, are generally timid creatures that avoid human contact. Adult males can weigh up to 600 pounds and run at speeds of 30 miles per hour, though they are generally timid and avoid humans. Bears habituated to human food sources can be unpredictable and dangerous. Their powerful jaws can exert 800 pounds of pressure per square inch, and their claws, designed for climbing and digging, can inflict devastating wounds. The female park ranger immediately began directing people to move away from the bear while calling for backup on her radio. She shouted warnings about maintaining distance and not making sudden movements. Several vendors began securing their food displays, knowing that the bear was likely attracted by the smell of fresh bread, honey, and produce. The bear, a young male estimated at around 250 pounds, moved slowly through the square, occasionally stopping to investigate overturned trash cans. The park ranger said that she noticed the bear's relaxed posture and lack of aggressive signals. She estimated that if people maintained their distance, the bear would likely wander back toward the wooded areas surrounding downtown within minutes. Derek, however, saw an opportunity rather than a danger. As the crowd retreated, he stepped forward, ignoring the ranger's direct orders to stay back. He announced loudly that he knew how to handle bears, that this was just a small one, and that everyone was overreacting. The bear, now about 30 feet away, looked up from a spilled container of apple cider, making brief eye contact with Derek before returning to its investigation. The ranger shouted specifically at Derek to stop moving toward the animal, explaining that bears could charge without warning. Other bystanders joined in the warnings, but Derek waved them off dismissively. What happened next unfolded with shocking speed. He walked steadily toward the bear, speaking to it in what he apparently believed was a calming tone. The bear likely perceived his approach as an immediate threat. When the animal finally looked up, its body language shifted immediately, ears flattening against its head, a clear warning sign. The bear rose slightly on its hind legs, another defensive posture that Derek misinterpreted as curiosity rather than the threat assessment it actually was. Derek reached out and placed both hands on the bear's back, apparently attempting to guide it toward the tree line. The bear responded with rapid, forceful bites and short raking motions designed to repel a perceived threat. Its massive head swung toward Derek's extended arm, and the animal's jaws clamped down with crushing force, breaking bones and tearing muscle tissue. Derek's scream cut through the air as the bear's teeth punctured through muscle. The bear responded instantly, delivering a rapid defensive burst of bites and raking strikes lasting only seconds. Derek's attempts to pull away only worsened the damage. When the animal finally released him, Derek stumbled backward, his mangled arm hanging uselessly at his side, blood pouring from multiple puncture wounds. The bear, having neutralized what it perceived as a threat, calmly turned and began walking toward the nearby French Broad River. His girlfriend's screams for help were immediately answered by the ranger, who radioed for emergency medical services while applying pressure to Derek's wounds with her jacket. The arterial bleeding was severe, and Derek's face had already begun turning pale from blood loss. Other bystanders formed a protective circle, keeping the area clear while the ranger worked to control the hemorrhaging. Police arrived and rapidly cleared the square to maintain scene control. Derek remained conscious but was going into shock. A nurse practitioner who had been shopping assisted the ranger with first aid. Paramedics arrived 9 minutes later, finding Derek in severe hemorrhagic shock. Despite their efforts to stabilize him during transport, he suffered cardiac arrest in the ambulance and was pronounced dead at the hospital. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to severe vascular damage and tissue destruction, leading to uncontrolled hemorrhage, with contributing factors of shock and cardiac arrest. The bear was later euthanized due to human fatality involvement. His family, embarrassed by the circumstances and his public disregard for safety warnings, requested that no memorial service be held and declined all media interviews. It was February 19, 2013, on the scrubby eastern fringe of the Serengeti in northern Tanzania, where the protected parkland fades into dirt access roads, cattle paths, and wide stretches of lightly patrolled bush. The terrain was dry and uneven, with tall grass broken by thorny shrubs, scattered acacia trees, and open ground that allowed wildlife and people to move through the same space without clear boundaries. Riding in the rear passenger seat was Ruan Keller, 26, a German travel vlogger with a modest following of just under 4,000 subscribers. He worked irregular warehouse logistics contracts at home and used most of his savings for short trips focused on close-range wildlife footage. His channel emphasized proximity, short clips filmed at ground level without narration, zoom, or music. He had no prior documented injuries from travel or outdoor activity. Ruan booked through a low-cost safari operator that permitted brief roadside stops outside the park's core zones. He was not insured for walking safaris, a restriction listed in his booking terms. Operator policy prohibited exiting the vehicle, though enforcement depended on the guide's discretion. Ruan requested stops calmly, citing lighting and framing, and repeated that he would remain near the vehicle. The van was stopped with the engine running and all doors closed. The road cut through dry yellow grass broken by thorn trees and low scrub. The air was still. Insects were audible over the idle of the diesel engine. Cape buffalo are heavy-bodied bovines commonly weighing between 1,200 and 1,800 pounds. They can accelerate rapidly over short distances, reaching speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour, and pivot with little warning. Vision is limited, but hearing and smell are acute. Solitary bulls are disproportionately involved in fatal human encounters, particularly during surprise or close-range approaches. Their horns curve outward and downward into a dense boss that absorbs force and transfers impact through the skull. Handheld camera footage shows a single buffalo standing roughly 120 feet from the road, angled slightly away with its head low. The guide slowed, but did not stop. Ruin leaned forward and asked for a pause. The guide refused and gestured toward the animal's posture and the lack of cover. Ruin repeated the request. The guide allowed a brief stop without authorizing exit. Dashcam audio records the guide instructing Ruin to remain inside the vehicle. Ruin exited anyway and stepped forward 2 paces with his camera raised. The buffalo lifted its head. Dust shifted beneath its hooves. Its ears rotated forward toward the sound of boots on gravel. The charge followed immediately. There was no false charge, ear spread, or lateral movement. The buffalo accelerated in a straight line with its head low and horns aligned. The right horn caught beneath the lower rib cage, lifting him off the ground. The impact expelled air audibly, captured by the dash cam microphone. His body was thrown backward and struck compacted dirt. His camera slid out of frame. The buffalo continued forward. It placed a forehoof on the upper torso and drove downward using body weight. The sound was dull and concussive. Ruin's legs flexed once, then drew inward. Blood mixed with saliva at the mouth as involuntary exhalation occurred, producing pale pink foam. The animal stomped again, then a third time. Each impact centered on the rib cage. Ribs collapsed inward, puncturing lung tissue. Each strike produced a brief, diminishing convulsion. The buffalo stepped back, snorted once, and lowered its head. No further voluntary movement is visible. From first contact to complete cessation of movement, approximately 25 seconds elapsed. The guide radioed base immediately and remained inside the vehicle. A ranger unit arrived 14 minutes later. No resuscitation was attempted due to extensive thoracic trauma and absence of breathing or pulse. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as massive blunt force trauma to the chest, including multiple bilateral rib fractures, bilateral lung collapse, and internal hemorrhage, with death following shortly thereafter. The dashcam footage was secured by park authorities. Ruin's family requested his channel be removed within weeks. The guide was suspended pending review and later reinstated. The incident was recorded as a non-defensive wildlife strike following unauthorized vehicle exit and appeared only in a regional wildlife safety bulletin, unnamed, a documented example of how rapidly minimum distance violations can become fatal. It was April 17, 2017, at a privately run elephant sanctuary outside Chiang Mai, Thailand, and the afternoon heat had turned the packed dirt clearing into a shallow basin of mud and dust where sound carried poorly and movement slowed. A live stream had already been running for nearly 20 minutes, its audio filled with breath, insects, and distant bells, when a decision framed as reverence quietly placed a human body in the only spot an elephant needed to be clear. Leora Vance, 31, had built a modest online following as a wellness and spirituality influencer, known for quiet broadcasts focused on breathwork, sound therapy, and calm proximity to animals. She avoided shock content and presented herself as deliberate and respectful. This trip to northern Thailand was intended to expand her platform beyond studio settings into what she described as something more grounded and ancient. She arrived in Chiang Mai a week earlier and selected a sanctuary that advertised ethical elephant interactions. The facility allowed supervised proximity for feeding and bathing, but prohibited kneeling or lying near the animals. During orientation, staff emphasized maintaining distance from the legs and feet at all times. Leora acknowledged the rules. For her scheduled live stream, she planned to sit quietly beneath a raised trunk to capture breathing and low-frequency rumbles through sensitive microphones. The filming area was a wide clearing at the edge of a teak forest. The ground was hard-packed soil mixed with churned mud from repeated elephant movement. Earlier cooling splashes had softened portions of the clay, especially near the rear of the space. The temperature had climbed above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. There was minimal shade aside from a canvas awning stretched between posts. Beneath it, a woven mat had been placed for demonstrations. A female Asian elephant weighing an estimated 9,000 to 10,000 pounds stood near the mat. Adult Asian elephants distribute their weight through broad padded feet nearly 18 inches across. Each step is controlled, but a single limb can carry several thousand pounds during weight transfer. Heat regulation requires frequent repositioning. The elephant's ears fanned steadily. She shifted her hind feet at intervals, compressing the damp soil and deepening shallow impressions. Painted warning signs marked restricted zones around the legs. A handler gestured twice for Leora to move the mat several yards back from the animal's projected path. Another staff member paused the broadcast to repeat that lying down near the elephant was prohibited. Leora adjusted her microphone stand but remained close. The elephant appeared calm. There was no trumpeting, no head tossing, no rapid trunk movement. She continued minor adjustments common in high heat, lifting and resetting her hind feet to relieve pressure and find cooler ground. Each small movement subtly altered her center of mass. The live stream showed Leora lowering from seated to kneeling, then onto her forearms. The mat shifted slightly under her weight. From the camera's angle, the elephant looked stationary. In reality, her left rear foot rested on softened clay that yielded slightly under load. The elephant lifted that hind foot and placed it several inches forward. The mud compressed with a dull suction sound. She paused, then lifted it again, swinging inward in a slow, deliberate arc as she settled into a more comfortable stance. The descending foot contacted Leora's lower torso. Initial contact was partial, but as the elephant committed weight to the new position, thousands of pounds transferred vertically through the broad pad. There was no stomp or sudden force, only increasing pressure. The pelvis, a rigid ring built to support body weight from above, fractured under compressive load. The sacroiliac joints separated, the abdomen compressed, forcing air from the lungs in a single exhale. With the thoracic cavity pinned between ground and mass, the diaphragm could not descend. Compressive asphyxia began immediately. The lumbar spine failed at multiple points as weight settled. Internal organs were displaced upward against the rib cage. Blood vessels within the pelvis ruptured, though external bleeding remained limited due to distributed pressure and absorbing mud. There was no thrashing. The compression prevented meaningful movement. The elephant made a small settling shift. Less than a step, more a redistribution of balance. Structural collapse completed. Loss of consciousness likely occurred within seconds due to hypoxia and catastrophic internal trauma. When the elephant instinctively lifted her foot to reposition on firmer ground, handlers moved in. By then, there was no voluntary movement. The elephant walked several slow steps away and resumed ear fanning. Emergency services were called at 3:18 p.m. Local responders arrived within minutes and confirmed death at the scene. The coroner listed compressive asphyxiation with catastrophic skeletal trauma as the cause of death, noting severe pelvic fractures, multiple lumbar fractures, and thoraco-abdominal compression. Investigators concluded the elephant's behavior was normal and non-aggressive. The sanctuary temporarily closed for inspection and later reopened with stricter enforcement of distance policies and a ban on personal live streaming equipment. The live stream was immediately removed from social media, fearing that this would inspire other people to try and tame wild elephants. There had been no charge and no display, only a routine weight shift on softened ground. The fatal mechanism was mechanical. It was September 8, 2016, when the morning air carried the scent of dust and dried vegetation across Zambia's lower Zambezi Valley. The dry season was entering its peak, concentrating wildlife around remaining water sources. For 29-year-old Callum Hendricks, an advertising executive from Sydney, the guided walking safari represented what he believed would be the most authentic experience of his 2-week African holiday. Callum had saved for 18 months to afford the premium safari package, which included 4 nights at an exclusive camp and 2 guided walking safaris. He had participated in 2 previous safaris, in Kenya and South Africa, both conducted entirely from vehicles. Those trips had left him confident that wildlife encounters were predictable and manageable when handled calmly. The walking safari group consisted of 6 tourists, lead ranger Tafadzwa Mwenda, and a tracker. The camp also assigned an armed backup ranger to follow several yards behind the group as rear security. His role was to watch the back trail, manage spacing, and respond if a sudden charge forced the group to split. Mwenda had worked in the valley for 12 years, guiding hundreds of walking safaris without serious incident. During the pre-dawn briefing, he outlined the protocols clearly. Guests were to remain in a single-file formation at all times. No one was to step out of position for any reason. Silence and immediate compliance with hand signals were mandatory. Elephants were identified as the greatest threat in the area, particularly solitary bulls encountered on foot. African elephants are the largest land mammals on Earth, with adult bulls weighing between 10,000 and 13,000 pounds and standing over 11 feet tall at the shoulder. They possess acute hearing capable of detecting ground vibrations and unfamiliar sounds from significant distances. Solitary bulls, especially older animals, are more likely to react aggressively to perceived threats. When an elephant commits to a charge, its speed and mass make escape nearly impossible. Injuries are typically caused by blunt force impact and crushing rather than tusks alone. The group had been walking for just over 2 hours when the tracker spotted a massive bull elephant feeding approximately 60 yards ahead, partially obscured by dense Jesse bush. Mwenda immediately halted the group and directed them behind a termite mound that offered partial concealment. The bull was old and imposing, with long, downward curving tusks and visible temporal gland discharge, suggesting an elevated hormonal state. The group remained still as the elephant fed, stripping bark from a dead tree. Several minutes passed without incident. Mwenda signaled for the group to begin a slow, silent retreat away from the animal's feeding path. Callum, positioned in the middle of the group, hesitated. He believed the distance was safe and that retreating was unnecessary. As the others began stepping backward, he took 2 steps forward instead, attempting to get a closer look at the elephant's size. The movement placed him fully outside the protective alignment of the group. Mwenda immediately moved toward Callum to pull him back, but before he could reach him, Callum shifted his weight again. His boot scraped against a buried root, producing a sharp cracking sound that carried through the still air. The elephant reacted instantly. His head snapped up, ears spreading wide as his trunk rose to test the air. He turned toward the sound and fixed on the exposed figure standing apart from the group. The bull initiated a mock charge, surging forward approximately 15 yards before stopping abruptly. His ears remained flared, trunk curled, body squared toward Callum. The display was a final warning. Experienced guides are trained to read that distinction. A mock charge is designed to intimidate and drive a perceived threat away without physical contact. The elephant will often stop short, testing whether the intruder retreats. Compliance typically ends the encounter, but failure to yield can escalate the behavior instantly. By remaining exposed and stationary, Callum unintentionally removed the outcome the bull was attempting to achieve. In elephant behavior, when a warning fails, the next step is not negotiation, it is force. Most of the group continued backing away. Callum remained standing, frozen in place and fully visible. When the elephant advanced again, the charge was immediate and committed. The ground shook as several tons of mass accelerated forward. Mwenda raised his point, .458, and fired at the elephant's chest, but the angle was narrow with Callum directly in the charge path. At that speed and distance, there was no opportunity for a second shot. The elephant reached Callum in seconds. The impact of the bull's head struck him squarely in the torso, launching him backward nearly 10 feet. He hit the ground hard and attempted to move, but the elephant was already repositioning. One massive front foot came down across Callum's lower body, crushing his legs and pelvis beneath its full weight. The elephant paused briefly, assessing whether the threat had been neutralized. Mwenda fired again, this time striking the ground directly in front of the bull. The concussive blast and dirt spray caused the animal to flinch. He turned away and retreated back into the Jesse bush, the encounter over. Callum lost consciousness almost immediately from the impact and crushing injuries. Emergency radio calls were relayed to the nearest airstrip, but the camp's remote position deep in the lower Zambezi meant the evacuation helicopter did not arrive for over 2 hours. Callum died before the helicopter reached the clearing, the combination of massive internal trauma and blood loss overwhelming the limited field treatment available. The investigation concluded that he had violated multiple safety protocols by leaving his designated position and advancing toward the elephant on foot. The safari operator issued revised briefings, emphasizing that walking safaris require absolute obedience to ranger instructions at all times.